It's February 1847, and you're standing in the doorway of your one-room cottage somewhere in County Cork, Ireland, watching your neighbours' children dig in the frozen mud with their bare hands. They're searching for anything that might have been a potato 3 months ago, maybe a fragment, maybe just the memory of one. The air smells like peat smoke and something else, something sweet and rotten that you've learned means bodies are lying in ditches not far from here. Your own stomach stopped growling 2 days ago, which you initially thought was a relief until you realise silence from your belly is actually a very bad sign. If you're thinking this sounds survivable with a little grit and determination, here's the truth. You probably won't make it through the next 4 months, and even if you do, you'll never quite be whole again. If you've ever wondered what separates inconvenience from catastrophe, go ahead and smash that like button, because we're about to spend the next few hours exploring exactly how thin that line really is. Subscribe if you want more history that'll make you grateful for your local grocery store, no matter how expensive it's gotten. And here's the thing, wherever you are right now, whatever time it is in your corner of the world, drop a comment below. Tell me your city and whether it's morning, afternoon, or the middle of the night. Tell me if you're listening to this well-fed or running on empty. Because understanding what real hunger meant starts with acknowledging how far most of us are from it. So settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab a snack if you want. The people in this story would have killed for the crumbs in your couch cushions. Sweet dreams. You need to understand something fundamental about being poor during a famine. It's not just that you're hungry while everyone else is hungry. It's that you're playing a completely different game with completely different rules, and you started that game already losing. When famine comes, it doesn't arrive like some democratic catastrophe that treats everyone equally. It's more like a predator with a keen sense for weakness, and you, with your empty pockets and your dirt floor and your single cooking pot, you're bleeding in the water. Money during normal times means the difference between comfort and hardship, between nice things and necessary things. Money during a famine means the difference between eating and starving, between living and dying. It really is that simple and that brutal. The wealthy might tighten their belts, might complain about prices, might even feel genuine concern about the state of affairs. You get to watch your children's bellies swell with the kind of bloating that comes from starvation, not from being full. You get to make decisions no human being should have to make. Let's be clear about your starting position, because it matters. Before the famine hit, let's say this particular disaster began about 6 months ago when the potato blight turned your field into a black stinking swamp of rot, you were already poor. Not struggling to save for a vacation, poor. Not even worried about making rent, poor in the modern sense. You were subsistence poor. You were every single thing you eat comes from that half acre of potatoes behind your cottage, poor. You were your entire annual cash income wouldn't buy a gentleman's coat, poor. Your cottage, if we're being generous enough to call it that, is maybe 15 feet by 12 feet. One room, walls of stacked stone and mud, a roof of thatch that leaks in a dozen places. No windows, because glass costs money, and besides, windows let out heat. There's a fire in the middle of the floor, no chimney, just a hole in the roof that theoretically lets smoke escape, but mostly just fills the space with a constant grey haze that makes everyone's eyes water. The floor is dirt. Literal dirt, packed down hard from years of feet. You share this space with however many children you've got, your spouse if they're still alive, and often enough a pig or some chickens because livestock is too valuable to leave outside where it might wander off or get stolen. Your furniture consists of maybe a rough wooden table, some stools or stumps, a pile of straw and rags in the corner that serves as everyone's bed. You own 2 cooking pots, both battered and repaired multiple times. You've got the clothes you're wearing right now, and maybe one other set for Sundays. Though calling them a set is generous, we're talking about rough wool and linen that's been patched so many times it's more patched than original fabric. Your shoes, if you have shoes, are falling apart. Your children probably don't have shoes at all. This was your normal. This was life before everything got worse. Now let's talk about what you ate back when there was food. Potatoes. That's not a simplification or an exaggeration. Potatoes for breakfast. Boiled potatoes. Maybe with a splash of buttermilk if you were lucky. Potatoes for dinner, more boiled potatoes. Potatoes for supper, you get the idea. An adult man in rural Ireland in the 1840s consumed about 10 to 12 pounds of potatoes per day. Your children ate slightly less, maybe 6 to 8 pounds. Do the math on that. A family of 6 going through 40 to 50 pounds of potatoes daily, every day, all year. You also kept a tiny patch for growing some cabbage or turnips, and if you were fortunate enough to have a small plot of land rather than being completely landless, maybe you grew a little oats to sell for rent money. The pig, when it was finally fat enough, got sold to pay the landlord. You almost never ate meat. Milk when the cow was producing, but even that usually got sold or made into butter to trade. Fish if you lived near water and had time to catch it, but time was something you didn't have much of because you were constantly working, labouring for your landlord, tending your potato patch, gathering turf for fuel, hauling water. It was monotonous. It was nutritionally questionable by modern standards. But here's the thing. It actually worked. Potatoes are remarkably nutritious. You can survive on them long term if you're also getting a little dairy. People did, you did, your parents did. It was boring enough to make modern meal preppers look adventurous, but it kept you alive. Then the blight came, and suddenly the entire foundation of your existence rotted into black slime literally overnight. You went to sleep with a field of healthy green plants and woke up to a stinking wasteland. The smell is something you'll never forget. Sweet and putrid, like a fruit gone bad mixed with decay, but magnified across entire valleys. Every potato in the ground turned to liquid mush. Every potato you'd stored for winter became inedible within days, and just like that, you have nothing. No food means you need to buy food, which means you need money, which means we circle back to the fundamental problem. You are poor. You have almost no money. You never had much money. Money wasn't really part of your economy, because you grew what you ate and ate what you grew. Maybe you had a few coins tucked away, savings from selling eggs or doing day labour. Maybe you had enough to cover a month's rent. Maybe you had the equivalent of a few pounds in modern currency. It's gone in a week, 2 weeks if you're incredibly careful. You buy grain, corn, oats, whatever's available, at prices that are already starting to climb because everyone else had the same idea. You ration it so carefully that everyone's constantly dizzy with hunger, but you ration it anyway because making it last is the only strategy you have. You water down the porridge until it's barely more than flavoured water. You give the children slightly larger portions because they cry more, and you can bear your own hunger better than you can bear theirs. The money runs out. Obviously, it runs out. It was always going to run out because there was never enough of it in the first place. Now you're poor during a famine with no money and no food and no prospect of either appearing magically in the near future. Now you're standing in your doorway watching other people's children dig in the mud, and your own children are inside doing the same in the corners of your cottage, and you're trying to figure out which impossible thing to attempt first. The wealthy are afraid during famines. The comfortable are worried. The middle sorts are anxious. You're being hunted. That's what it feels like anyway. Like there's something stalking you, patient and inevitable, and all you can do is keep moving and hope you find shelter before it catches up. Spoiler alert, it's probably going to catch you. You remember when a stone of oatmeal cost about 10 pence? You remember this very clearly because you bought it maybe twice a year when you needed something to supplement the potatoes, or when you were saving up for rent and needed to eat cheaply for a few days. 10 pence. You could earn that in a day and a half of hard labour, or by selling 4 dozen eggs, or by doing a week's worth of spinning wool in the evenings after your regular work was done. You check the price now, 2 months into the famine, and it's 2 shillings. That's 24 pence. The price has more than doubled, and your income has... Well, we'll get to that nightmare in a moment. You stare at those numbers, at the merchant's chalked board, and try to make the arithmetic work in your head. It doesn't work. There's no configuration of your labour and his prices that ends with your family eating. But you're still in the early days, relatively speaking, so you don't yet understand how bad the mathematics are going to get. Give it another month. That same stone of oatmeal is now 3 shillings. 6 weeks after that, it's 4 shillings and 6pence. By the time we're 6 months into this crisis, You're looking at prices that are 5, 6, even 8 times what they were before the blight. And here's the fun part. And by fun, I mean absolutely horrifying. Those prices are still climbing. In some places, at the peak of desperation, grain prices increase 10 or even 20-fold, 20 times the normal price, for the same food, from the same merchants. You start to understand very quickly that this isn't just inflation in the economic sense. This is predation. Let's break down why prices explode like this. Because understanding the mechanism doesn't make it hurt less, but at least you'll know what's killing you. It's basic supply and demand, that favourite phrase of people who've never missed a meal in their lives. Normally you and everyone in your village eat potatoes, the grain, oats, wheat, barley, corn that gets grown locally either gets exported for profit or purchased by people who can afford variety in their diet. There's a steady market, steady prices, then the potatoes fail. Suddenly every poor person in the country needs to buy grain instead. Demand increases by orders of magnitude almost overnight, but supply doesn't increase. The amount of grain that was harvested is the amount of grain that exists. You can't conjure more wheat out of thin air just because people are desperate for it. So prices rise. They rise fast and they rise brutally. Merchants will tell you, with apparently sincere faces, that they're simply responding to market forces. They'll explain that if they don't raise prices, people will buy up all the grain and then there won't be any left. They'll tell you that high prices ration scarcity, that this is actually better for everyone in the long run. They'll say this while calculating their profits, and you'll stand there with your empty stomach and your dying children and think about how reasonable that sounds in theory and how much it feels like murder in practice. Here's what makes it worse. Grain is still being exported. You watch carts loaded with oats and wheat roll through your village heading for the nearest port. You watch ships being loaded with food while you're starving. This happened in Ireland, in Bengal, in Ukraine, in China, in virtually every major famine where poor regions were integrated into larger economic systems. The food is there. It's just not for you because you can't afford it, and the people who own it can get better prices elsewhere. You can practically hear the economic argument being formed in response. But if they didn't export it, there'd be no incentive to grow it in the first place. Sure, completely reasonable. Explain that logic to your neighbour who died last week. The price increases hit different foods at different rates, and you learn to navigate this horrible landscape like a game where the rules change daily. Oatmeal becomes too expensive, so you switch to Indian corn, maize imported as emergency relief. Except nobody in Ireland knows how to cook it properly, and it's hard as stones. And it tears up your digestive system, but it's cheaper than oats, so you choke it down anyway. Then the corn gets more expensive because everyone's buying corn now. So you look at barley, then wheat flour, then anything, literally anything that contains calories and won't immediately poison you. You develop a new skill, price comparison shopping as a survival strategy. You walk to 3 different merchants even though you barely have energy to walk anywhere because maybe one of them is charging a penny less per pound, and that penny is the difference between eating for 3 days versus 2. You calculate prices per ounce in your head. You become an expert in stretching grains further than they were ever meant to stretch. More water, longer cooking, smaller portions. The absolute cruelty is that your ability to earn money hasn't increased along with prices. It's actually decreased, which we'll explore more deeply soon. But the basic fact is, grain costs 5 times more and you're earning the same amount as before. Or less. Usually less. Let's say you were making about 8 pence a day doing agricultural labour before the famine. That's assuming you could find work every day, which you couldn't, but let's be generous. On that wage, when oatmeal cost 10 pence per stone, you could feed yourself and contribute to feeding your family. Tight, but manageable. Now oatmeal costs 4 shillings, that's 48 pence per stone. You're still making 8 pence per day, again assuming you can find work at all. A stone of oatmeal now costs you 6 days of labour. 6 full days of back-breaking work for 1 stone of grain that might feed your family for 3 or 4 days if you're stretching it desperately thin. You see the problem. You can't eat faster than you're starving. You can't work fast enough to buy enough food. The mathematics don't close. There's no amount of effort or thrift or careful planning that makes this equation balance. And you know what's really keeping you up at night, besides the hunger? The knowledge that these prices are someone's profit. Every penny increase represents money flowing from your empty pockets into someone else's full ones. The merchants are getting rich, not comfortable, rich. The grain dealers, the corn importers, the middlemen and speculators, they're making more money during the famine than they made in a decade of normal times. You hear stories about merchants who bought up grain early, when prices first started rising, and stored it. Just held onto it while people starved, waiting for prices to climb higher. Then they sold at the peak and made fortunes. You hear about landlords who exported grain from their estates, shipped it overseas for premium prices while their own tenants were dying in ditches. You hear these stories and you think about words like evil and murder and wonder why these men aren't being treated like the criminals they clearly are. But they're not criminals. They're businessmen. They're following market logic. They're being rational economic actors, and you're being a rational dead person. Sometimes you see the wealthy complaining about prices too, and it's almost funny in a bleak sort of way. A gentleman grumbling that his usual fancy wheat flour has gotten terribly expensive, that his household budget is quite strained, that something really must be done about profiteering. He's annoyed. You're dying. Same famine, different universes. The worst moments are when you have money, actual coins in your hand from selling something or doing some job, and you go to buy food and discover the price has jumped again since yesterday. Yesterday you had almost enough for a week's worth of grain. Today you have enough for 5 days. You stand there holding the same coins, and they've lost value just by sitting in your pocket overnight. It's like watching your life drain away in real time. You learn to recognize the look in other poor people's eyes when they're doing the same arithmetic you're doing, when they're standing in the market calculating and recalculating and trying to find some combination that equals survival. You're all playing the same rigged game. You all know how it ends. There are moments of dark comedy even in this. A merchant solemnly explaining that he'd love to charge less, truly he would, but he's got to make a living too. A government official expressing deep concern about prices while doing absolutely nothing to control them. A wealthy woman donating a few pounds to relief efforts, an amount that would barely buy 2 sacks of grain at current prices, and being praised for her extraordinary generosity. You'd laugh if you had the energy. The price explosion teaches you something profound about how the world actually works. Money isn't neutral. Markets aren't natural forces like weather or gravity. These are systems created and maintained by humans, and they're working exactly as intended. The question you can't quite articulate but feel in your bones is, intended for whom? Not for you. That much is clear. You were never supposed to survive this. The prices prove it. So you need money to buy food at these insane prices, which means you need work. This seems straightforward enough. You've always worked. You're good at working. Your entire life has been physical labor from before dawn until after dark. Surely someone needs something done, and surely they'll pay you for doing it. Except nobody needs anything done anymore. At least nobody needs you to do it. The job market doesn't gradually decline during a famine. It doesn't slowly contract, giving you time to adjust or find alternatives. It collapses. Immediately. Completely. Like someone cut the strings on a puppet and the entire economy of labour just crumples to the ground. Let's start with the most obvious category. Agricultural work. Before the famine, you probably earned most of your cash income by working on larger farms during planting and harvest seasons. The big landlords needed crews of labourers to get crops in the ground and bring them in. Planting potatoes, harvesting grain, digging drainage ditches, building stone walls, clearing fields. Hard work, back-breaking work, but it was work. You could count on a certain number of days per month, especially during busy seasons. Now the potatoes are gone. Why would anyone plant a crop that's guaranteed to rot? Some farmers try alternative crops, but that requires capital for seed and fertilizer that most don't have. More importantly, it requires optimism about the future, and optimism is in even shorter supply than food. So fields that would normally be planted sit empty. No planting means no one needs planters. No crop means no one needs harvesters. Whole seasons of work just evaporate. The grain fields still need some tending, sure, but here's the problem. The farmers are broke too. Maybe not starving in a ditch broke like you, but broke enough that they're cutting every possible expense. Labour is an expense. You're an expense. They're making do with family members and maybe 1 or 2 permanent workers instead of hiring day labourers. The jobs that do exist go to people with connections, people who've worked that specific farm for years, people who aren't you. You show up at farms looking for work anyway, because what else are you going to do? There are already 20 men standing there, looking hollow-eyed and desperate. The farmer needs maybe 2 workers for the day. He picks the strongest-looking ones, or the ones he knows, or sometimes just the ones who showed up first. The rest of you walk away with nothing except the energy you wasted getting there. Construction work disappears for similar reasons. Before the famine, there was always building happening, cottages being repaired, walls being built, roads being improved. Local landlords had projects. The church needed maintenance. People hired labourers to dig wells or expand their homes. That's all stopped now. No one's improving their property when they're worried about eating. The landlords who might have hired you are watching their rental income collapse because their tenants can't pay rent. They're not starting new building projects. They're hunkering down and spending nothing. Craft work dies even faster. If you had a skill, if you were a weaver or a cobbler or a carpenter or a thatcher, you're discovering that skills don't matter when no one can afford to buy anything. People aren't commissioning new furniture when they're selling their old furniture for food money. They're not buying new clothes. They're not hiring anyone to repair their roofs. They're barely surviving, and surviving doesn't require your services. You might be a talented weaver who could produce beautiful cloth, and normally you'd sell that cloth or trade it for other goods. Now, nobody wants cloth. They want food. You can't eat linen. Your skill, which took years to develop, which was supposed to be your security, is suddenly worthless. The looms sit idle. The tools gather dust. You're just another unskilled labourer competing for non-existent work. Servant positions vanish too, and this hits women especially hard. Before the famine, if you were a young woman, you might have worked as a domestic servant for a wealthy family. It wasn't great work, long hours, low pay, plenty of abuse, but it usually included room and board, which meant at least you were eating. Those positions are being cut left and right. The wealthy are reducing their household staffs, keeping maybe a cook and a housekeeper but dismissing the extra maids and scullery workers and laundresses. You're out on the street with no income and no food and nowhere to sleep. Here's what's grimly amusing. The wealthy genuinely seem surprised that their servants are upset about being dismissed. They'll explain very patiently that times are hard, that everyone must economise, that surely you understand. They've reduced their wine budget too, you see. They're all making sacrifices. The fact that their sacrifice means slightly fewer dinner parties, and your sacrifice means starvation doesn't seem to register as a meaningful difference. The fundamental economic mechanism destroying your employment is simple. Demand has collapsed. In normal times, there's a whole ecosystem of buying and selling and working and trading. People buy things. Buying things creates demand for labour to make those things or do those services. You work, you earn money, you buy things, which creates demand for other people's labour. It's circular. It keeps flowing. Famine breaks the circle. Everyone stops buying anything except food. And even food purchasing is desperate and minimal. All the money that would have flowed through the economy, paying for services, purchasing goods, hiring workers, is either gone or being hoarded by the wealthy who are too scared to spend it. The velocity of money slows to a crawl. Work disappears because no one's buying the products of that work. You try everything. You walk to neighbouring villages looking for work. Nothing there either. They've got their own unemployed crowds. You offer to work for lower wages, undercut the other desperate men. Sometimes this works for a day or two, but it's a race to the bottom. Everyone's lowering their prices, which means even when you do find work, it pays almost nothing. You end up labouring all day for wages that won't buy enough food for a single meal. There's also the problem that you're getting weaker. Starvation drains your strength, makes you slower and less capable. Farmers hiring workers are looking for men who can dig ditches or haul stones for 12 hours straight. You can barely stand up without getting dizzy. Even when there's work, you're increasingly unable to do it, or you do it so slowly that you don't get hired back the next day. Some landowners offer work specifically designed for the destitute. Breaking stones, building useless roads to nowhere, digging and filling in ditches. This is either relief work organised by the government or private charity efforts. The wages are deliberately kept low below market rates because the theory is that you should only take these jobs if you're truly desperate. Well, you're truly desperate, so you take the work. You break stones for 8 hours and earn enough to buy maybe half of what your family needs to eat that day. It's something. It's not enough, but it's something. The psychological toll of unemployment during famine is its own special torture. You're not just hungry, you're useless. Your entire identity has been built around work, around providing, around doing what needs to be done. Now there's nothing to do. You can't help your family. You can't earn. You just sit there, feeling yourself weaken, watching your children suffer, completely powerless. Men gather in groups, clusters of unemployed labourers standing around in villages, outside churches, anywhere there might be news of work. You trade rumours. Someone heard that a farm 10 miles away might be hiring next week. Someone else says the government is starting a road project. The rumours are usually false, but you chase them anyway because the alternative is accepting that there's no hope at all. The waiting is almost worse than the hunger, waiting for work that never comes. Waiting in lines on the off chance someone might hire you. Waiting for news, for relief, for anything to change. Time moves so slowly when you're doing nothing except starving. And here's a bitter irony. There's actually work that needs doing. Fields are overgrown. Roads are in terrible condition. Buildings need repair. The physical work exists. What doesn't exist is money to pay workers to do it. Or more accurately, what doesn't exist is wealthy people's willingness to spend money to have it done during a crisis. The work and the workers are both present, but the economic system can't connect them because that would require investment. And investment requires believing in a future, and the future feels awfully uncertain right now. You start to understand that employment was never about your value as a worker. It was always about whether paying you served someone else's interests. Right now, it doesn't. So you don't work, so you don't eat. The system is functioning exactly as designed. When the work dries up and the last of your saved coins are spent, you look around your cottage and start doing inventory. What do you own that someone might buy? What can you convert into food money? The answer turns out to be almost everything, but also almost nothing, depending on how you look at it. You start with the items you can most afford to lose. The extra cooking pot, you've got 2, and technically you only need 1. A couple of tools that you use infrequently. Maybe a wooden bucket that's seen better days but still holds water. Some piece of furniture that's not absolutely essential. You take these items to market or to a local dealer and discover the first terrible truth about selling during a famine. Everyone else is selling too. The dealer looks at your pot with an expression of profound boredom. He's seen 40 pots today. He's got a shed full of pots. He offers you a fraction of what it would have cost you, a fraction of what it would have fetched in normal times. You try to negotiate. He shrugs. He doesn't need your pot. You need his money. The mathematics of desperation aren't in your favour. You take his offer because what else are you going to do? The coins barely buy 2 days of grain. The pot that represented security, the backup pot, the one for when the main pot broke, is gone. You tell yourself it was worth it because your children ate. You try not to think about what you'll sell tomorrow. Next goes the furniture. The stools first because you can sit on the floor. The table takes longer to part with because eating off the ground feels like admitting something you're not quite ready to admit about your situation. But hunger is persuasive, and the table goes. You get even less for it than for the pots because, again, everyone's selling furniture. The market is flooded. Dealers are paying almost nothing because they know you'll take whatever they offer. You sell the blankets you're not actively using. Then you sell some of the blankets you're using and just pile everyone closer together at night. Body heat compensates somewhat, you tell yourself, though everyone's shivering. You sell any small decorative items. Maybe there was a religious picture frame, or a decent cup, or some small thing that made your cottage feel slightly less miserable. These things fetch almost nothing, but almost nothing buys almost enough grain for almost one meal, and you've stopped thinking in terms of anything except the immediate next step. Tools go next, which is particularly cruel because tools represent your ability to work and earn. But you can't eat tools, and there's no work anyway, so what's the point of keeping them? Your spade, your scythe if you had one, any implements of your trade. The carpenter sells his saws and planes, the weaver sells the loom. You sell the things that defined you as a worker, and with them goes any pretense that you'll recover from this quickly. You're not temporarily embarrassed, you're being systematically dismantled. Clothes become currency. You've got your everyday rags and maybe one slightly better outfit for church or market. The better outfit goes first. Then you start evaluating your everyday clothes. Do you really need 2 shirts? Can you make do with one? The answer is yes, you can make do, because the alternative is not eating. You sell the shirt. Then you're looking at your children's clothes, and this is where it starts to hurt in new ways. Your daughter has a shawl, nothing fancy, just rough wool, but it's hers and it keeps her warm. You sell it. You watch her cry, and you explain that she'll be fine, that she can share with her sister, that this is necessary. She's maybe 7 years old, and she's learning what necessary means. Her shoes, those falling apart leather scraps that barely deserve the name, those go too. Now she's barefoot. It's winter. You tell yourself children are resilient. You try not to look at her feet. Your son has a cap. Had a cap. You sell it for enough money to buy grain for one day. 1 cap equals 1 day of half rations. That's the exchange rate for your child's warmth. Here's something nobody tells you about poverty. It's expensive. Selling things when you're desperate means you get terrible prices. Buying things when you're poor means you pay premium rates. You sell your good wool coat for a pittance, and then, when winter really sets in and you're freezing, you can't afford to buy any coat at all, even a worse one. You've moved permanently down the ladder of material existence, and every rung you drop makes it harder to climb back up. The bed, and we're using that term loosely for your pile of straw and rags, starts getting thinner as you sell off anything that can be separated and sold. The straw itself eventually goes for animal feed. You're sleeping on the dirt floor now with maybe 1 blanket shared among 6 people. You're cold all the time. Hunger makes you feel colder. Lack of sleep makes the hunger worse. It's all connected, all spiraling down together. You become an expert in the tiny gradations of value. A metal button is worth more than a wooden one. A pot with a handle is worth more than without. Wool fetches more than linen. You calculate the relative worth of every object you own down to the tiniest scrap because everything is potentially food if you can find someone to buy it. The local dealers and merchants know exactly what's happening. They're not stupid. They know you're selling to avoid starvation, which means you have no negotiating position whatsoever. Some of them are genuinely sympathetic and give you fair prices, or as fair as a flooded market allows. Others are coldly calculating, offering insultingly low amounts because they know you're too desperate to refuse. A few are actively predatory, clearly enjoying their power over you. You learn to identify which dealer is which, and sell accordingly, though choice is a luxury that fades as options narrow. There's a special shame in watching your life get reduced to a pile of coins that disappears almost as fast as you earn it. That pot represented years of saving, a significant purchase. It sells for enough to feed your family for 2 days. 2 days. Years of ownership converted into 48 hours of survival. The mathematics are insane, but you can't argue with them. Sometimes you see wealthier people at the markets buying up these sold goods. They're getting incredible deals, snapping up furniture and tools and household items at bankruptcy prices. They're not evil necessarily, they need furniture too, and why not get a good price? But watching someone cheerfully haggle down the price of your table, the table your family ate at for a decade, watching them count out coins like this is just another day of smart shopping, while you're trying not to weep from hunger and humiliation. That does something to you. You realize that your disaster is someone else's opportunity. The famine is redistributing wealth from the poor to the not poor, not just through starvation but through forced sales, through this systematic liquidation of everything you own at criminally low prices. Jewellery, if you had any, goes early. Maybe your wife had a simple ring, or there was a silver pin passed down through the family. These items are supposed to be emergency savings, and this certainly qualifies as an emergency. They sell for enough to buy a week or two of food. Then they're gone, and so is that insurance policy. You start eyeing things you previously considered unsellable. The door to your cottage, it's just wood, and someone might want it for firewood or building materials. The stones from your walls could be reused. You're contemplating selling the literal structure of your shelter. Some people actually do this. They dismantle their own cottages piece by piece, selling the materials until they're sleeping in a roofless shell or under hedgerows. The psychological progression is fascinating in a horrible way. Each sale requires less justification than the last. The first time you sell something meaningful, you agonize over it. You discuss it with your spouse. You lose sleep. By the 20th sale, you're just numb. This item for that many coins, for that much food, for that many more days of life. It's mechanical. You've become a machine for converting possessions into survival time. And here's the cruelest part. It's never enough. You can sell absolutely everything you own, strip your life down to nothing, and it still won't be enough to wait out the famine. The prices are too high and the value of your goods too low. You're bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. It feels like you're doing something, like you're fighting, but the outcome is already determined. Eventually you reach the end of inventory. There's nothing left to sell. You're wearing one layer of rags. Your children are barefoot. The cottage is empty except for one pot and the people huddling in it. You've converted your entire material life into food, and the food is already gone and you're still hungry and the famine continues. You're stripped down to just yourself now, just a body. And bodies, as you're about to learn, have their own resources to exhaust. When there's no food and no money and nothing left to sell, you start looking at the world differently. That field over there isn't just a field, it's full of grass. Grass is green. Cows eat grass. Maybe you can eat grass. This is the kind of logic that starvation produces, and before you dismiss it as obviously absurd, understand that you're going to try it. You're going to try all of it. The progression into eating non-food follows a certain terrible pattern. You start with things that are technically edible, things that humans have eaten before in hard times, but wouldn't choose under normal circumstances. Nettles, for instance. They grow wild everywhere, they're free, and if you cook them long enough they lose some of their sting. They're bitter and unpleasant, and provide almost no nutrition. But they fill your stomach with something green, and that feels like it should count for something. You learn which weeds are edible and which will kill you. Dandelion leaves, wild garlic, sorrel. You're foraging like a medieval peasant, which makes sense because you've essentially been returned to medieval living standards. You spend hours crawling through fields and along roadsides, picking plants that you cook into a bitter soup that barely qualifies as food. Your children cry because it tastes awful. You make them eat it anyway because awful is better than nothing. Seaweed, if you live near the coast, becomes a staple. You gather it at low tide, wash it, boil it into a slimy mass that smells like the ocean's basement. It's disgusting. It's also free and theoretically contains nutrients. You eat it and try to convince yourself that people in other parts of the world consider seaweed a delicacy, which is technically true, but somehow not very comforting when you're choking down handfuls of unseasoned sea vegetation for the third meal in a row. Tree bark comes next. This sounds insane until you're actually hungry enough to consider it, and then it sounds like a reasonable option. You've heard stories about people eating bark during hard times. How bad could it be? The answer is pretty bad, but also you're going to do it anyway. You choose trees carefully. Pine bark is supposedly less terrible than others. You strip the outer bark to get to the inner layer, the cambium, which is slightly softer. You dry it, grind it if you have the tools and energy, mix it with whatever grain you might have to stretch the supply. Or you just boil it into a pulp and eat it straight. It tastes like wood, because it is wood. It has the texture of wood pulp, because that's exactly what it is. Your stomach fills up, which temporarily stops the hunger pangs, but there's almost no nutritional value. You're tricking your body into thinking it's eaten. It hasn't. You've just packed your digestive system with fibre that it can't process. but the sensation of fullness, even false fullness, is such a relief that you keep doing it. The problem with bark is that it tears up your insides. The fibre is rough, almost impossible to digest. You get terrible stomach cramps. Your digestion, already stressed from malnutrition, basically gives up. You become constipated from the sheer mass of indigestible material, or you get diarrhea as your body desperately tries to expel what it can't use. Either way, you're in pain. You eat the bark anyway. Grass seems like it should work better than bark. It's softer, greener, more like actual food. Animals live on grass. Unfortunately, you're not an animal with a ruminant digestive system. You can't break down cellulose like a cow can. You boil the grass into a soup, or just eat it raw if you're desperate enough. It fills your mouth with green mush that tastes like bitterness and dirt. You swallow. Your stomach cramps. Nothing happens except pain. Some people try to eat hay with similar results. You're basically eating dried grass, which is somehow even less digestible than fresh grass. It cuts your mouth. It forms a solid mass in your stomach. Your body extracts essentially zero nutrition from it. But it's something to chew, something to swallow, some way to address the screaming emptiness inside you. Roots and tubers that aren't quite edible become suddenly appealing. You dig up roots from any plant you can find, trying to discover some overlooked source of food. Most of them are bitter or toxic, or both. You eat them anyway, in small quantities, testing to see if they'll kill you quickly or just make you sick. Getting sick is acceptable. You're already sick from hunger. What's a little more suffering? There's a plant, let's say it's some variety of wild root that's mildly toxic. And you know it's mildly toxic because people have gotten ill from it before. But you also know that if you soak it for a long time and boil it extensively, you can reduce the toxicity to maybe won't kill you levels. So you spend hours processing these roots, using up precious fuel for your fire, using up energy you don't have, and the result is a pot of bitter mush that makes everyone who eats it feel nauseous, but doesn't quite induce vomiting. Success, by current standards. Then there's clay, actual dirt. This is the point where you've clearly crossed from desperate but rational into body is eating anything to fill the void. Clay has been consumed during famines throughout history, and not because people were confused about what food is. It's because clay fills your stomach, and when you're starving, the sensation of fullness becomes divorced from the reality of nutrition. You find deposits of clay, maybe from a riverbank or a particular type of soil, and you eat it. Some people dry it and grind it into powder to mix with water. Others just eat the wet clay straight. It has a mineral taste, chalky and thick. It coats your mouth and throat. It sits in your stomach like a stone, which is essentially what it is. The clay provides zero nutrition. Less than zero, actually, because it can bind to what few nutrients you're getting and prevent absorption. It causes horrific constipation. It damages your digestive tract. People die from eating clay, from intestinal blockages, from the cumulative damage. But in the moment when your stomach is eating itself, when the hunger is so overwhelming that you do anything to make it stop for even a few minutes, clay seems reasonable. Children are especially likely to eat dirt and clay, partly because they're less able to understand why it won't help, and partly because they're just so hungry they'll try anything. You watch your child eating mud from the floor of the cottage, and you're too weak and too defeated to stop them. What else are you going to offer instead? Some people eat charcoal from fires, operating on some vague theory that it might contain something useful. It doesn't. It's carbon. You're eating carbon. Your teeth turn black. Your mouth fills with grit. Nothing improves. Animal feed, straw, chaff, grain hulls that would normally go to livestock becomes human food. You're competing with animals for scraps that were already considered too poor quality for human consumption. The straw cuts your mouth and digestive tract. The chaff provides minimal nutrition, but it's organic material that expands in your stomach, and that has to count for something, right? It doesn't, but you eat it anyway. Blood, if you can get it, is actually nutritious. If someone slaughters an animal anywhere near you, you're begging for the blood. You cook it into a kind of pudding, or just drink it liquid. This is one of the few non-standard foods that actually helps. that contains protein and iron. The problem is access. Very few animals are being slaughtered because everyone who owns an animal has either sold it or is keeping it alive as long as possible for milk or eggs or as a last resort. Bones get boiled and reboiled for days if necessary to extract any possible nutrient. You boil them until they're soft enough to crush, then you eat the powder. You're extracting calcium and trace minerals from what's essentially skeletal remains. The result is a thin, greyish soup that tastes like death, but might contain a calorie or two. Leather becomes food. Your shoes, if you still have shoes. Leather straps, anything made from animal hide. You boil it for hours to soften it, then cut it into small pieces and chew it until it breaks down enough to swallow. It's protein, technically. It's also nearly impossible to digest and tastes like you're eating a boot, which you literally are. Some people die from eating leather because it forms blockages. Others just suffer through it and extract maybe a tiny amount of nutrition. The absolute worst part of eating these non-foods is that they trick you into thinking you're solving the problem. Your stomach feels full, so your brain thinks you've eaten, but you haven't. You're still starving. You're just starving with a stomach full of bark and grass and clay. In some ways it's worse because now you feel bloated and sick on top of being malnourished. You also start fantasizing about food in ways that feel almost hallucinogenic. You remember meals from years ago in perfect detail, the texture, the taste, the smell. You have dreams about eating. You wake up convinced you just had a full meal, and the realization that it was a dream is devastating. Your mind is torturing you with memories of better times, which would be cruel enough, but it's also wasting energy on these elaborate fantasies when you need every bit of cognitive function just to survive. There are whispers about worse things than bark and clay. Whispers about people eating things that shouldn't be mentioned. Things that cross lines that are supposed to be uncrossable. You tell yourself those are just rumours, exaggerations born from fear and desperation. You tell yourself you'd never go that far. You're probably right. But the certainty you feel about your own limits gets a little shakier every day. While you're busy eating bark and clay, your body is having its own private crisis that you're only dimly aware of at first. Starvation isn't a simple process where you just get progressively hungrier until you collapse. It's a systematic shutdown, a methodical dismantling of everything that makes your body function. And because you started this famine already poor, already malnourished, already running on minimal reserves, you're experiencing the worst of it faster and harder than anyone with a cushion of wealth and regular meals. The first thing that happens is your body burns through whatever glycogen stores you have in your liver and muscles. That's the quick access energy, the stuff your body keeps on hand for immediate use. In a well-fed person, that might last a day or two. In you, already living meal to meal even before the famine, it's gone in hours. You feel it as sudden, profound weakness. Tasks that were easy yesterday are exhausting today. Walking to the market leaves you winded and dizzy. Next goes the fat. Your body starts burning fat reserves for energy, breaking them down to keep you alive. This sounds fine in theory. Isn't that what fat is for? Except you don't have much fat to begin with. You were lean before the famine, all muscle and bone from a lifetime of hard labour and minimal food. The little bit of fat you had disappears within weeks. You watch it happen in real time. Your face becomes gaunt, cheekbones pressing against skin. Your ribs start showing. Your arms and legs thin out until they look like sticks. Women lose their body fat even faster in some ways, and with it goes their menstrual cycles. Your wife or daughters stop menstruating within a month or two of serious food shortage. This is the body's desperate survival mechanism. Pregnancy and reproduction require resources, and there are no resources, so the system shuts down. It's also one of the few mercies of starvation, if you can call it that, because getting pregnant during a famine is essentially a death sentence. Once the fat is gone, your body turns to muscle. This is where things get particularly grim. Your body starts cannibalizing itself, breaking down muscle tissue to convert the proteins into energy. You're literally eating yourself from the inside. The process is called cachexia, though you don't know that term. You just know that you're getting weaker by the day. The muscle loss is cruel because you need muscle to work, and you need work to earn money, and you need money to buy food. But your body doesn't care about economic logic. It needs fuel, and muscle is fuel, so muscle goes. Your arms thin out, your legs become spindly. You look at your thighs and barely recognize them. Where there used to be some substance, some strength, there's just skin over bone. You tire incredibly easily now. Climbing a small hill leaves you gasping. Carrying anything heavier than a few pounds is nearly impossible. You have to rest constantly. The worst part is that you can feel yourself weakening, can feel your body betraying you. You want to work, want to be useful, but your muscles literally cannot perform the tasks you're asking of them. Children suffer this differently than adults. Their bodies are still trying to grow, still programmed for development, but there's nothing to build with. Growth stops. A 6-year-old stops gaining height and weight. A 12-year-old doesn't hit puberty on schedule. If they survive, and that's a very big if, they'll be permanently stunted, smaller than they should have been, marked for life by this period of starvation. Your youngest, the toddler, develops a distended belly that makes them look almost pregnant. This isn't fullness from food, it's kwashiorkor, or protein deficiency causing fluid to accumulate in the abdomen. Their belly swells while their limbs waste away. It's one of the signature looks of famine, this horrible contrast between bloated stomach and stick-thin arms and legs. People who don't understand starvation sometimes think the swollen belly means the child is well fed. It means the opposite. It means they're dying. Edema, swelling from fluid retention, shows up in other places too. Your ankles swell up. Your face gets puffy even as it becomes more skeletal. Press your finger into the swollen flesh and it leaves a dent that stays there for minutes. Your body is failing at basic fluid regulation because your kidneys and other organs are being starved of resources. Speaking of organs, they're struggling. Your heart is a muscle, and like all your muscles, it's wasting. It beats less efficiently. Your blood pressure drops. You get dizzy when you stand up because your cardiovascular system can't quite manage the basic task of pumping blood to your brain. You faint sometimes, just collapse without warning, and wake up on the ground with no memory of falling. Your digestive system is in full revolt. You've got nothing to digest, but also you've damaged it with bark and clay and other garbage you've been eating. You're constantly nauseous. Stomach cramps come in waves. You have diarrhea, which is particularly dangerous because it dehydrates you and makes you lose what few nutrients you're getting. Some people get constipated instead, their digestive system's just grinding to a halt. Neither option is pleasant. Your immune system is shutting down. Fighting off infections requires energy and resources, and you have neither. A cold that would normally be a minor annoyance becomes a serious threat. A small cut that should heal in days stays open for weeks, potentially getting infected. Your body has no reserves for healing, no spare capacity for fighting off diseases. You're vulnerable to everything. Sores develop on your skin, especially in places where bone is close to the surface. You're so thin that lying down hurts because there's no padding between your skeleton and the ground. The pressure causes skin breakdown. You develop ulcers on your hips, your shoulders, your ankles. They don't heal. Your hair changes texture, becomes brittle and dull. It falls out in clumps. Your teeth loosen in their sockets because your body is pulling calcium from anywhere it can find it. Your gums bleed. Everything about you is deteriorating simultaneously. The cold becomes unbearable. Fat provides insulation, and you have no fat. Your body isn't generating much heat because metabolism requires fuel. You're cold all the time, even in moderate weather. In winter, it's agony. You can't get warm no matter how close you huddle to the fire. Your extremities, fingers, toes, nose, ears, are always freezing. Frostbite becomes a real risk because your circulation is so poor. Mentally, you're slipping too. Starvation affects your brain just like it affects every other organ. You have trouble concentrating. Your thoughts get fuzzy, scattered. You forget things mid-sentence. Decision-making becomes difficult because your brain literally doesn't have enough glucose to function properly. You stare into space for long periods, not thinking about anything in particular, just existing in a kind of fog. Your emotions become unpredictable. You cry at nothing. You feel rage over tiny frustrations. You're apathetic about things that should matter. This isn't weakness of character, it's neurological breakdown. Your brain chemistry is completely disrupted by malnutrition. Serotonin, dopamine, all the neurotransmitters that regulate mood require nutritional building blocks, and you don't have them. Sleep becomes difficult despite exhaustion. You're too hungry to sleep deeply. You drift in and out of consciousness, never quite resting, never quite awake. When you do sleep, you have vivid dreams about food, or nightmares, or both. You wake up more tired than when you lay down. Your body temperature regulation fails. You develop fevers that aren't really fevers, just your malfunctioning system getting temperatures wrong. Or you become hypothermic without even being in particularly cold conditions because your body can't maintain core temperature. There's a point in starvation, you can feel it coming, where your body stops fighting quite so hard. The desperate hunger pangs ease up. You feel almost calm. This isn't recovery. This is your body giving up, conserving its last reserves, preparing for shutdown. It's a dangerous sign, not a hopeful one. The poor experience all of this worse and faster than the wealthy for several reasons. First, you started from a position of baseline malnutrition. Even in good times, your diet was inadequate. You were already deficient in various nutrients, already running on minimal reserves. When the famine hit, you had no buffer, no cushion of health to draw on. Second, you're still trying to work. The wealthy can rest, conserve energy, reduce their activity to match their reduced food intake. You're still laboring when you can find work, still walking miles to search for food or employment, still burning calories you don't have because the alternative is giving up entirely. Your body is being asked to perform hard physical labor while simultaneously starving. It's an impossible situation. Third, you're exposed to worse conditions. The wealthy retreat into comfortable homes with fires and beds. You're in a drafty cottage with no fuel and no blankets. You're exposed to cold, to damp, to infection vectors. Your environment is actively hostile, adding stress to an already overstressed system. Fourth, the food you do manage to get is of terrible quality. The wealthy, eating less, are at least eating nutritious food, meat, eggs, dairy, good bread. You're eating bark and nettles and grain so mouldy and contaminated that it barely qualifies as food. You're filling your stomach without nourishing your body, sometimes actively poisoning yourself. You can see the hierarchy of starvation playing out in real time. The wealthy look a bit thinner, perhaps, a bit pale. They complain of hunger. You look like a skeleton. Your children look like animated corpses. The physical manifestation of poverty has never been more visible or more grotesque. There's a point of no return, medically speaking. Once you've lost a certain percentage of body weight, once certain organs have sustained too much damage, you can't recover even if food becomes available. Your body has been broken too badly. You'll die even if someone hands you a full meal. You don't know exactly where that line is, but you can feel yourself approaching it. So you're already starving. Your body already shutting down system by system. And that's when disease shows up to finish the job. Because apparently one catastrophe isn't enough. Famine and epidemic are best friends, inseparable companions that travel together and feed off each other in the most literal sense. Your weakened, malnourished body is basically a welcome mat for every pathogen in the vicinity, and there are a lot of pathogens in the vicinity. Typhus arrives first, or maybe it's always been there and just suddenly has ideal conditions to spread. Typhus loves overcrowding, loves filth, loves populations weakened by hunger. It's transmitted by body lice. And you've absolutely got body lice because everyone has body lice. You sold your extra clothes weeks ago. You can't afford soap. You don't have fuel to boil water for washing. The lice have taken up permanent residence in the seams of your one remaining shirt, and they're having the time of their lives. The typhus starts with a fever that hits like a wall. One day you're your normal level of miserable. The next day you're burning up, shaking with chills despite the heat radiating from your skin. Your head pounds like someone's driving nails into your skull. Every muscle aches, which is impressive given how little muscle you have left. You develop a rash, small red spots spreading across your torso, your arms, eventually everywhere. Within days you're delirious. The fever cooks your brain. You can't tell what's real and what's hallucination. You're lying on the dirt floor of your cottage. Remember, you sold the bed, shivering and sweating simultaneously, calling out for people who aren't there. Maybe people who are dead. Your family watches helplessly because there's nothing they can do. No medicine, no doctor, and even if there were a doctor, you couldn't afford one. No treatment except hoping your body fights it off, which is asking a lot from a body that's already losing its fight with starvation. Some people recover from typhus, many don't. The mortality rate is horrifying even for healthy populations. For starving populations, you're looking at coin flip odds at best. The disease burns through entire households. One person gets it, the lice spread it to everyone else in the cramped space, and soon you're all down with fever. If you're very unlucky, you all die together. If you're moderately unlucky, some survive to bury the others. There are no good options here. Dysentery shows up next, and honestly, at this point you're almost offended. Dysentery is a disease of contaminated water and food, and you barely have water and food to contaminate. But contaminate them you do, because sanitation has completely collapsed. The shared wells are polluted. Waste is everywhere. There's no organised disposal system in your village, and people are too weak to maintain even basic hygiene practices. Human waste in the streets, in the water supply, in the soil. It's medieval out here. You drink water you know might be contaminated because the alternative is dying of thirst, and you're already dying of several other things, so what's one more risk? The dysentery hits your digestive system like a punishment. Severe diarrhea, stomach cramps that double you over, sometimes bloody stool if things are really going poorly. You're losing fluids faster than you can replace them, which is particularly dangerous when you're already dehydrated from lack of food. Dysentery is cruel because it takes the minimal nutrition you're getting and flushes it straight through your system. You eat something, bark soup, nettle porridge, whatever you've managed to acquire, and it comes out the other end before your body can extract anything useful. You're not just failing to gain nutrition, you're actively losing ground. Your body is expelling water and electrolytes and whatever trace nutrients might have been available. You become weaker faster. Children die of dysentery in shocking numbers. Their smaller bodies can't handle the fluid loss. They dehydrate quickly, become listless and glassy-eyed, then slip away. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes it's faster. You watch your child deteriorate and you can't stop it. More water won't help if the dysentery just expels it. The only real treatment is medicine you don't have and nutrition you definitely don't have. Then there's famine fever, which is probably typhus or relapsing fever, or sometimes typhoid. Nobody's being particularly precise about diagnosis because everyone's too busy dying. The symptoms blur together. Fever, weakness, confusion, rash. Sometimes people cycle through periods of fever and recovery, getting sick again just as they start to improve. Each cycle weakens them further. Relapsing fever is particularly nasty. You get sick, suffer for a week or so, then actually feel better. You think you've survived, that you've beaten it. Then it comes back. The fever spikes again, the symptoms return, and this time you're starting from an even weaker position. Some people go through multiple cycles before either recovering or dying. It's psychological torture on top of physical suffering. The diseases spread fastest in the cramped, filthy conditions where poor families live. Your one-room cottage houses 6 or 7 people all breathing the same air, sharing the same lice, using the same pot, drinking from the same cup, if you still have a cup. When one person gets sick, everyone gets sick. There's no quarantine, no isolation. Where would anyone go? You've got one room. The wealthy, in their spacious homes with separate bedrooms and servants' quarters, can isolate sick family members. They can afford doctors who at least try to help, even if medical knowledge is limited. They have clean water from private wells. They can burn contaminated bedding and buy new. You can't burn your one blanket. You can't avoid the sick person when they're lying 2 feet from where you sleep. Tuberculosis, always lurking in the background of poor communities, becomes epidemic during famine. TB loves weakened immune systems and close quarters. It spreads through the air, through the constant coughing that echoes through your cottage. Someone develops a cough that won't quit, starts losing weight, though how you tell when everyone's skeletal anyway is unclear, coughs up blood. It's TB, and now everyone's been exposed. TB is a slow killer under normal circumstances. During a famine, it works faster. Bodies that might have fought off the infection or contained it in a dormant state just can't mount that defense. The bacteria multiply freely. You develop the classic consumption look: pale, wasted, burning with slow fever, coughing constantly. Some people last months, others weeks. All of them end up in mass graves. Scurvy appears because what few foods you're eating contain zero vitamin C. Your gums bleed and swell. Old wounds reopen. You bruise at the slightest touch. Your teeth fall out. Scurvy is eminently preventable. Just eat some fresh vegetables or fruit, but you don't have fresh vegetables or fruit. You sold your cabbage patch weeks ago. There's no fruit. You're eating bark and grass, neither of which contains vitamin C. Skin infections become life-threatening. A simple scratch, the kind you'd normally ignore, gets infected. Without proper nutrition, your body can't heal it. The infection spreads. You develop abscesses, cellulitis, sepsis. People die from infected blisters. The vulnerability is almost comical, except it's killing you. Smallpox, measles, scarlet fever, all the usual infectious diseases that cycle through populations, become far deadlier during famine. Childhood diseases that normally kill a percentage now kill the majority. A measles outbreak tears through a community of starving children like wildfire through dry grass. The mortality rate quadruples, quintuples. Diseases that should be survivable aren't, because survival requires resources and there are none. The combination of starvation and disease is multiplicative, not additive. It's not that you're dealing with two separate problems, they amplify each other. Starvation weakens your immune system, making you vulnerable to disease. Disease increases your body's nutritional requirements exactly when you have no nutrition available. Fighting infection requires energy. You don't have energy, so you can't fight the infection, so it kills you. Medical care, such as it exists, is unavailable to you. Doctors serve the wealthy. Hospitals, if there are any nearby, either don't admit the destitute or are so overcrowded and filthy that going there is basically a death sentence. The fever sheds, workhouse infirmaries and charity hospitals are nightmares. Packed rooms full of dying people, minimal treatment, overwhelmed staff. You go there to die, not to recover. Traditional remedies and folk medicine are all you have, herbal treatments that might help a little or might do nothing, poultices and teas made from plants you can gather. Prayer, which is free but of debatable medical efficacy. You try everything because what else are you going to do? Maybe the willow bark tea brings the fever down slightly, maybe it's placebo. Either way, it's not enough. The community's ability to care for the sick collapses. Normally, neighbours would help each other, bring food, tend the ill, watch children. Now everyone's sick or starving or both. There's no food to bring. No one has energy to care for anyone outside their immediate family and barely enough for them. The social bonds that held communities together fray and snap under the pressure. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. The usual rituals, wakes, proper funerals, individual graves, become impossible. People die in cottages and lie there for days because no one has the strength to move them. Eventually they're dragged out and thrown into mass graves, pits where dozens or hundreds of bodies are dumped together. No markers, no prayers, just disposal. The smell of disease and death hangs over everything. That sweet rotten smell from the beginning, remember? It's everywhere now. Infected wounds, dysentery, bodies decomposing. You stop noticing it after a while because your nose adjusts, but visitors from unaffected areas are hit with the stench like a physical wall. You're living in what amounts to a plague zone. Disease and famine have transformed your community into a death trap where the combination of starvation and infection picks people off one by one, family by family, until whole villages are decimated. And because you're poor, because you started with nothing and have less than nothing now, you're right in the centre of it with no escape route and no defence. You always believed that family was unbreakable. That's what you were taught, what society drilled into you. Blood is thicker than water, parents love their children unconditionally, marriage is for better or worse. Families stay together no matter what. It's a nice idea. It's also something that assumes families aren't being asked to watch each other starve to death while being powerless to help. Turns out unconditional love has some conditions after all, and everyone slowly dying is apparently one of them. The fracturing starts small, almost invisible. Your oldest child, maybe 15 or 16, announces they're leaving to find work in the next county. They've heard rumours of employment, of landlords hiring, of something better somewhere else. The rumours are probably false, but hope is a powerful drug. You want to tell them to stay, that the family should remain together, but what are you offering them here? A slower death? You let them go, maybe you even encourage it. One less mouth to feed, they might find something, they might survive. You tell yourself it's temporary, they leave, you never see them again. Maybe they found work and a new life and understandably want nothing to do with the nightmare they escaped. Maybe they died on the road. Maybe they're in another county having this exact same experience. You don't know. You'll never know. Next, the younger children become bargaining chips in negotiations with survival. There are workhouses, institutions, orphanages run by churches or charitable organisations. They take children, supposedly to care for them. Feed them, educate them. The conditions are horrific. Overcrowded, disease-ridden, brutal discipline, but they do provide food. Minimal food, terrible food, but more than you can provide, which is none. You walk your 8-year-old daughter to the workhouse. She's holding your hand, asking where you're going, why she needs to come. You can't look at her. You tell her it's temporary, just until things get better. She'll be fed and safe, and you'll come get her soon. You're lying. She probably knows you're lying. She starts crying when you hand her over to the workhouse master. She's screaming for you as you walk away. You can hear her for blocks. You tell yourself this is mercy. She'll eat. She'll live. That's what matters. What you don't let yourself think about is that workhouses during famines have mortality rates that rival the streets. Disease spreads like wildfire in the overcrowded dormitories. The food is barely adequate. The work they'll make her do is hard. She might die there, but she'll definitely die if she stays with you, so this is the better option. Probably. Maybe. You have to believe that, or you'll go insane. Some parents leave their children on the steps of churches or the doorsteps of wealthy homes. Just abandon them in the night with a note or a prayer or nothing at all. The logic is clear. Someone with resources might take pity, might take the child in, might give them a chance. It's a desperate lottery where the prize is your child's survival, and the cost is never seeing them again. Hundreds, thousands of children are abandoned this way. Foundling hospitals become overwhelmed. Churches don't know what to do with the constant stream of starving children appearing on their doorsteps. The lucky abandoned children get taken in by orphanages or adopted by families who need servants. The unlucky ones die of exposure before anyone finds them, or get sent to workhouses anyway, or end up in the street child economy of begging and theft. You've seen them, packs of feral children roaming towns, skeletal and hollow-eyed, organised into loose gangs for protection. That could be your child. Might already be your child, for all you know. Husbands disappear. It's common enough that there's a bleak acceptance about it. A man says he's going to look for work or check on relatives, or walk to the next town for food distribution. He leaves. He doesn't come back. Sometimes this is because he died on the road, collapsed from weakness, succumbed to fever. Any number of ways this famine is killing people. Sometimes it's because he actually found work somewhere and decided starting over alone was easier than coming back to a family he can't save. Sometimes it's because he just can't bear watching his children starve and takes the coward's way out. You can be angry about abandonment, and people are, but you also understand it. There's only so much psychological torture a person can take. Only so many times you can look into your child's hungry eyes before something breaks in you. Some people break toward desperate action. They steal, they beg, they do whatever it takes. Some people break toward abandonment. They flee the unbearable situation because staying means witnessing horror they can't stop. Wives leave too, though less often, probably because women have fewer options for survival alone. But it happens. A woman walks away from her children, from her husband, from the whole terrible situation. Maybe she's trying to reach her parents' home. Maybe she's looking for work as a servant. Maybe she's just walking until something changes or she dies. The desperation is gender neutral, even if the opportunities aren't. Siblings get separated as families make awful calculations about who has the best chance of survival where. The older boys might be sent to one workhouse, the younger children to another, the girls to a third. The family that lived as a unit that shared everything, that was supposed to be unbreakable, gets scattered across institutions and towns. The plan is always to reunite later when things improve. Things don't improve, and the reunions don't happen. You start noticing which families are shrinking. Last month the Murphys had 7 children. Now they have 4. You don't ask what happened to the other 3. Maybe they died. Maybe they were sent away. Maybe they're in the workhouse. It's not your business, and besides, your family is shrinking too. You're down from 6 to 4 yourself. Everyone's losing people. The psychological weight of these decisions is crushing. You're choosing between impossible options: abandon your children or watch them die, stay together and all starve or separate, and maybe some survive. There's no good choice. Every option leads to suffering and loss. You're being asked to make decisions that no human should have to make, and then live with the consequences. Some parents kill their children before killing themselves. This is the darkest edge of famine desperation, and it happens more often than anyone wants to acknowledge. A parent, driven mad by starvation and despair, decides that a quick death is more merciful than slow starvation. They drown the children, or smother them, or poison them if poison is available, then take their own lives. It's murder-suicide driven by a completely broken mind and unbearable circumstances. The community is horrified, but also grimly understands. Madness and famine are close companions. The elderly make their own calculations. Grandparents who realize they're consuming resources that could keep grandchildren alive simply stop eating. They give their portions away, claim they're not hungry, gradually fade. Or they walk away, leave the cottage one day and don't come back, choosing to die alone somewhere rather than be a burden. This is framed as noble self-sacrifice, and maybe it is, but it's also a tragedy that people feel compelled to choose death to save others. Marriage bonds dissolve under the pressure. Couples who loved each other, who built lives together, find that starvation destroys intimacy and affection. You're too exhausted for kindness. Every interaction becomes about survival. Who ate what? Who's too weak to work? Whose fault this is? The resentment builds. Some couples simply stop talking to each other, coexisting in cold silence. Others fight constantly. Some marriages end through abandonment. Very few emerge intact. The things people say to each other during famines are unforgivable. Words spoken in hunger and fear and desperation that can't be taken back. A husband blaming his wife for having too many children. A wife cursing her husband for not providing. Parents showing favoritism, giving slightly more food to one child over another, and the other children noticing and understanding what that means. Siblings turning on each other over scraps. The famine doesn't just kill people. It poisons relationships, destroys trust, turns families into competitions for scarce resources. There are exceptions, of course. Some families genuinely do stick together, share everything equally, support each other to the end. Some parents protect their children with every ounce of strength they have. Some marriages grow stronger through shared suffering. But these are the exceptions that prove the rule. Most families fracture. The bonds that seemed unbreakable break. You'll spend the rest of your life, if you have a rest of your life, dealing with the guilt and trauma of these decisions. The child you sent to the workhouse, the spouse who left or whom you drove away, the parent you let walk into the night, the sibling you couldn't save. These ghosts will haunt you forever, and the worst part is you'll never know if you made the right choices because there were no right choices, only impossible ones. The community structure breaks down alongside the family structure. The networks of mutual support, neighbours helping neighbours, extended families pooling resources, communities coming together in hard times, all of that collapses. Everyone is too desperate. Trust evaporates. You can't help your neighbour because you can't help yourself. The social fabric that held society together unravels thread by thread. Churches try to hold things together, offering what comfort and aid they can, but they're overwhelmed. Priests and ministers watch their congregations dissolve. They perform mass burials and listen to confessions of desperation and try to offer hope they don't feel. Some clergy are genuine heroes, giving everything they have to help. Others retreat into doctrine and judgment, condemning the starving for their lack of faith. Neither approach stops the disintegration. What you're left with is isolation in the middle of a crowd, surrounded by other suffering people but fundamentally alone. Your family scattered or dead. Your community fractured. Your relationships destroyed by the sheer weight of trying to survive. You're just a body at this point, alone with your hunger and your guilt and your memories of what used to be before everything fell apart. So your family is fractured, your body is failing, you're eating bark and clay, and you might reasonably think that's rock bottom. Surely things can't get worse. Surely the people with power and resources would show some mercy during a catastrophe. That's adorable. You're about to learn that crisis doesn't inspire generosity in the wealthy. It inspires opportunity. Your desperation is someone else's profit margin, and they're going to squeeze every last penny out of you before you die. Let's start with your landlord, who has not forgotten that you owe rent. You might think that massive crop failure and widespread starvation would warrant some flexibility on rent collection, maybe a temporary suspension or reduction. You would be wrong. Rent is due on the same schedule as always, in the same amounts as always, and the fact that you're starving is filed under "not my problem." The logic, as explained to you by the landlord's agent who comes collecting, is perfectly rational from a certain perspective. The landlord has expenses too. He has mortgages, debts, a lifestyle to maintain. He's already suffering from reduced income because so many tenants can't pay. He can't just forgive everyone's rent or he'd be ruined himself. This all makes perfect economic sense right up until you remember that ruined for him means selling one of his estates, while ruined for you means your children dying in a ditch. You explain that you have no money. You sold everything. There's no crop to sell because the crop rotted. You can't work because there's no work. The agent nods sympathetically and says he understands. Truly he does, but rent is still due. Perhaps you have relatives who could help. Perhaps you could borrow. Perhaps you should have planned better. That last suggestion is particularly galling. Yes, you should have planned for a catastrophic blight that destroyed the single crop your entire survival depended on. Excellent financial advice. Some landlords offer deals. You can work off your rent by labouring on their estates. 12 hours a day, backbreaking work, for wages that are maybe half what they'd normally pay, and those wages go directly to your rent debt rather than to buying food. You're working yourself to death, literally given your weakened state, to pay for the privilege of living in a crumbling cottage on land you don't own. It's indentured servitude with extra steps. The alternative to paying rent is eviction. The landlord's agents arrive with crowbars and muscle. They physically remove you from the cottage, throw your minimal possessions into the road, then demolish the building. They knock down the walls, cave in the roof, make it uninhabitable so you can't just move back in after they leave. This practice is systematic and widespread. Landlords clearing their lands of unprofitable tenants, getting rid of the problem of non-paying poor people by simply making them homeless. You stand in the road watching your home of 20 years get reduced to rubble. Your children are crying. You're holding the one pot and the single blanket you managed to grab. Everything else, what little you hadn't already sold, is buried under stones. You now have nowhere to sleep, no shelter from weather, no place to even sit down that's yours. You've been demoted from poor with shelter to homeless poor, which is a significant downgrade in an already terrible situation. The evicted families cluster together under hedgerows, in ditches, in the ruins of other demolished cottages. You're literally living in a ditch now, which you previously thought was just an expression but turns out to be accurate. The ditch provides minimal protection from wind. It provides no protection from rain. It's cold and wet and miserable. And this is your home now because you couldn't pay rent during a famine. Landlords defend the evictions as economic necessity. They can't afford to support non-paying tenants. The estates must be productive. Empty land can be converted to more profitable uses. Grazing land for cattle, larger farms with fewer workers, whatever makes more money than your potato patch did. Your suffering is just an unfortunate byproduct of sound business practices. The fact that they're profiting from your removal is purely coincidental. Some landlords go further and offer to pay for their evicted tenants to emigrate. They'll buy you passage on a ship to America or Canada or Australia, get you out of Ireland entirely, which solves their problem permanently. This sounds generous until you realise the conditions. The ships are floating nightmares, overcrowded, disease-ridden coffin ships where mortality rates can hit 30 or 40%. You're being offered a lottery ticket where the prize is maybe not dying on the voyage and the cost is leaving your homeland forever, with no resources and no plan for what happens when you arrive. You take it anyway because what else are you going to do? Die in a ditch in Ireland, or maybe die on a ship heading somewhere that might possibly be better? The latter has at least some hope attached. So you get on the coffin ship with hundreds of other desperate people, packed into a hold with no ventilation, minimal food, no sanitation, and you pray. Some of you make it, many don't. The ones who survive arrive in a foreign country with no money, no connections, no prospects. But at least you're not the landlord's problem anymore, which was the whole point. Meanwhile, if you need money, and you desperately need money, there are moneylenders willing to help. Willing is perhaps the wrong word. Eager, predatory. They're circling like sharks, ready to offer loans at interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. 50% interest, 75%, sometimes more. The terms are structured so you can almost never pay it back. You borrow 5 shillings to buy food. You're supposed to pay back 8 shillings within a month. But you can't earn 8 shillings in a month because there's no work and you're starving. So the debt rolls over, the interest compounds, and suddenly you owe 12 shillings, then 20, then amounts that bear no relationship to what you originally borrowed. You're trapped in a debt spiral with no escape route. The moneylenders know exactly what they're doing. They're not expecting full repayment from most borrowers. What they're expecting is to acquire your assets when you default. You put up your tools as collateral, or your pig, or a claim on your future labour. When you can't pay, and you can't pay, they seize the collateral. Your desperation has been converted into their profit. The system is working exactly as they designed it. Some moneylenders are even more creative. They buy your future crop at massive discounts. You need money now, so they offer to pay you today for whatever you manage to grow in the next year. They pay you maybe a quarter of what that crop should be worth. You take it because you need to eat today and maybe you won't even survive to next year, so who cares? If you do survive and do grow something, you have to hand it all over to the moneylender while staying hungry yourself. Your labour has been pre-purchased at bankruptcy prices. Employers, the few who are hiring, recognise that they're operating in a buyer's market. There are 50 desperate men for every job. They can offer wages that are insulting, degrading, barely enough to survive on, and someone will take the work because the alternative is starvation. Wages that would have been 8 pence a day before the famine are now 4 pence, or 3, or payment in food instead of money, and the food they provide is minimal. The work itself gets harder, and the conditions worse. Employers know you're too desperate to complain or refuse. They can demand longer hours, more dangerous work, faster pace. They can verbally abuse you, knowing you won't quit. Where else would you go? What else would you do? Your vulnerability is their leverage. Women face particular exploitation. Domestic service positions that previously offered room and board now offer board only, or minimal wages with no accommodation. Sexual exploitation becomes common, employers demanding favours in exchange for work or wages. Women with no other options, desperate to feed their children, sometimes comply. The alternative is watching your family starve. The choice isn't really a choice. Some employers set up arrangements that are basically scams. They offer work but delay payment, promising wages at the end of the week or month. Then when payment day comes, there's some excuse. Business is slow, they'll pay next week, take it or leave it. You've already done the work, already exhausted yourself, and now you're not getting paid. You can try to fight it legally, which requires money for lawyers and time you don't have, or you can just accept the theft of your labour. The government relief work programs, when they finally start, aren't much better. They're deliberately designed to pay below market wages to ensure only the truly desperate apply. You're building roads to nowhere, breaking rocks into smaller rocks. doing pointless labour for wages that won't actually feed your family. The point is to provide some employment while not making it attractive enough that people would choose relief work over real work. The fact that there is no real work available seems to have escaped the program designers. Shop owners and merchants, remember them from when we talked about price explosions? They're still finding ways to profit. They offer credit at extortionate rates. They sell spoiled or contaminated food at premium prices because you're desperate enough to buy it. They water down the milk, mix sawdust into the flour, sell grain that's mouldy or infested. You know it's happening, but what are you going to do? Not buy food? Some merchants run company store arrangements where your wages get paid in scrip that's only good at their shop, at their prices. You work, you get paid in special currency, you spend it at the only place that accepts it, and somehow you always end up owing more than you earn. It's wage slavery dressed up in economic language. The cruelty is that all of this is legal. The landlords are exercising their property rights. The moneylenders are engaging in voluntary contracts. The employers are responding to labour market conditions. The merchants are pursuing profit. Everything is above board, properly documented, economically rational. The fact that it's grinding you into paste is just an unfortunate externality. You start to understand that the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended. It's designed to extract maximum value from labour and resources, and you're a resource. Your desperation makes you exploitable. Your lack of options makes you cheap. Your suffering makes someone else wealthy. The famine hasn't disrupted this system. It's just made it more visible, stripped away the pretense that there's anything fair or just about it. The psychological damage of this exploitation compounds the physical damage from starvation. You're not just hungry, you're humiliated. You're not just weak, you're powerless. Every interaction with the wealthy reminds you that you're disposable, that your life has no value beyond what can be extracted from it. You're watching your children die while the people who could help are calculating their profit margins. And the absolute worst part, you can't even hate them effectively because you need them. You need the landlord not to evict you. You need the moneylender's loans. You need the employer's jobs. You need the merchant's food. Your survival depends on the very people who are exploiting you, which means you can't fight back without cutting your own throat. They have all the power, and they know it, and there's nothing you can do about it except endure and hope you survive long enough for something to change. Spoiler, things don't change, they get worse. But we'll get to that. Eventually the people in charge acknowledge that something needs to be done about all the dying. Public pressure mounts, newspapers report on the catastrophe, charitable organisations start raising funds, and the government reluctantly admits that perhaps some relief effort might be warranted. You allow yourself a flicker of hope. Help is coming. Someone cares. Someone's going to fix this. That hope lasts about as long as it takes you to encounter the actual relief system, at which point you realise that help designed by comfortable people for desperate people tends to be heavy on conditions and light on actual helping. The workhouse is presented as a solution. There are these institutions, see, where the destitute can go to receive food and shelter in exchange for labour. It sounds reasonable in theory. You're poor and starving, they have food and shelter, you work for it, everyone benefits. The reality is that workhouses are specifically designed to be so miserable that only the truly desperate will enter them, which you'd think would be fine during a famine when everyone is truly desperate, except the misery part doesn't scale down just because more people need help. It just means more people get to be miserable together. You approach the workhouse in your area, a large imposing building that looks more like a prison than a refuge. There's already a crowd outside, hundreds of skeletal people hoping for admission. The first problem becomes immediately apparent. There's not enough room. The workhouse was built to handle maybe 100 inmates. There are currently 300 crammed inside and 200 more waiting to get in. You join the line and wait. People around you are collapsing from weakness. Some die while waiting. Their bodies are dragged aside and the line shuffles forward. After 2 days of waiting, you reach the entrance. You're assessed by an official who determines whether you're destitute enough to qualify for admission. This is almost funny because you're clearly starving. You look like an animated skeleton. but there are forms to fill out and rules to follow. They ask about your assets. Do you own any land, any livestock, any tools or valuables? You sold all of that weeks ago, but you have to prove it. The bureaucratic process of demonstrating that you're sufficiently destroyed to deserve help is its own special torture. You're admitted, finally, and immediately separated from your family. Men go to one side, women to another, children to a third. This is policy. Families are deliberately broken up because the workhouse system believes that keeping families together would make the place too comfortable, and comfort would encourage dependency. You're here to suffer while being kept barely alive, not to be comfortable. Your wife is led away. Your remaining children are crying. You're told this is for everyone's benefit. The men's section is a large dormitory packed with maybe 100 men sharing space meant for 30. The beds are wooden platforms with minimal bedding, arranged so close together you can't walk between them. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, sickness and despair. This is where you'll sleep, assuming sleep is possible while listening to the coughing, groaning and crying of 100 dying men. The work comes next. You're here to labour in exchange for your keep, and labour you will. The tasks are deliberately pointless. Breaking stones into smaller stones, picking apart old rope fibre by fibre, digging holes and filling them in again. The work isn't productive, it's punitive. It's designed to be soul-crushing, busy work that ensures you understand you're being punished for the crime of poverty. You work 10 to 12 hours a day, despite being so weak you can barely stand. The food is technically food. Watery porridge for breakfast, bread and thin soup for dinner, maybe some potatoes if supplies allow, which is grimly ironic given that potato failure is why you're here. The rations are calculated to keep you alive but not actually nourished. You're hungry after every meal, sometimes hungrier than before because eating a small amount awakens your appetite without satisfying it. The portions are also smaller than promised because corruption is rampant. The workhouse master and his staff are skimming supplies, selling food that should go to inmates, pocketing the difference. You're being shorted on your already inadequate rations so someone can make a profit. Complaining gets you punishment, reduced food, harder work, solitary confinement. So you don't complain, you just stay hungry. Disease runs through the workhouse like wildfire through a tinderbox. Remember all those diseases from a couple of sections back. They love workhouses. Typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis, all of them spreading freely through the overcrowded, poorly ventilated dormitories. The fever sheds, special isolation rooms for the sick, are overwhelmed. Sick people lie in the general dormitories spreading infection to everyone else. You watch men die in the bed next to you. Their bodies are removed and someone new takes their place the same day. The mortality rate in workhouses during famines is staggering. Sometimes 20, 30, even 40% of inmates die. You entered the workhouse to avoid dying of starvation on the street. Now you're possibly dying of typhus in a crowded dormitory. It's not clear this was an improvement. The rules are Byzantine and strictly enforced. No talking during meals, no leaving the grounds without permission, which is never granted. No possessions beyond the workhouse uniform they issue you. No privacy, no dignity, no autonomy. You're treated like a criminal because Victorian morality has decided that poverty is a moral failing and you need to be rehabilitated through suffering. You're allowed to see your family maybe once a week, in a supervised setting, for limited time. Your children barely recognize you. Your wife looks worse every time you see her. The women's work is different. Laundry, cleaning, kitchen tasks, but equally exhausting for starving bodies. Your youngest child is in the children's section, and you've heard rumours about conditions there that make you sick with worry. High mortality rates, brutal discipline. But what can you do? You're trapped in this system now. Leaving the workhouse is theoretically possible but practically difficult. You can discharge yourself, but then you're back on the street with nothing. The workhouse won't let you take anything with you. You leave in the clothes you arrived in, which you probably sold months ago, so you might leave literally naked. And if you leave, you can't come back for a certain period. It's designed to prevent people from using the workhouse as temporary shelter. You're supposed to commit fully to institutionalization, or manage on your own. Meanwhile, outside the workhouses, soup kitchens are being established by charitable organisations and government programmes. Free soup for the starving, surely this will help. And it does help a little in the sense that something is better than nothing. But the soup kitchens are overwhelmed from day one. The soup itself is barely nutritious, and the conditions for receiving it are sometimes absurd. You join the soup kitchen line before dawn because if you arrive late, the soup runs out. You wait for hours. The line is full of skeletal people, many too weak to stand, leaning on each other or sitting on the ground. When you finally reach the front, you're handed a bowl of thin soup, water with some vegetables and maybe a hint of grain. It's hot, which is something. It's wet, which helps. It provides maybe a quarter of the calories you need for the day. Some soup kitchens require you to bring your own bowl. If you don't have a bowl, because you sold it weeks ago for food money, you don't get soup. This seems designed to fail the people who need help most, but apparently that didn't occur to the organisers. You fashion a container from a tin can or beg to borrow someone's bowl and go through the line twice. The soup kitchen operates maybe 3 times a week, or only on certain days, or runs out of supplies and closes for weeks at a time. The inconsistency means you can't rely on it. You still need to find food other days. The soup is a supplement, not a solution, but it's being presented as comprehensive relief. Government aid, when it arrives, comes wrapped in ideology and red tape. There are fierce debates among officials about the best way to help. Some argue for direct food distribution. Others insist that free food will create dependency and destroy the local economy. Others argue that this is a natural disaster and the government shouldn't interfere with market forces. While these debates rage, people are dying. The aid that's eventually approved is means-tested, bureaucratic, and insufficient. You have to prove you're destitute, which requires paperwork most people can't complete because they're illiterate or too weak to navigate the process. You have to be approved by local officials who might have their own biases about who deserves help. The process takes weeks while you're starving now. The aid itself is often in the wrong form. They send Indian corn, maize, which nobody knows how to cook properly. It's hard as rocks, tears up your digestive system, and causes its own health problems. But it's cheap, which is what mattered to the purchasers. The fact that it's nearly inedible in the form provided is your problem to solve. Distribution is chaotic. Aid ships arrive, but there's no organised system for getting food to the people who need it. Local officials, merchants, and middlemen all take their cuts. Corruption siphons off supplies. What was supposed to feed 1,000 people feeds 700 by the time it actually reaches the starving. Some relief programs require labour in exchange for food, but the labour demanded is beyond the capacity of starving people. You're supposed to build roads for 10 hours a day to earn your ration. You literally cannot do 10 hours of hard labour on a starvation diet. You try, you collapse, you don't get the full ration because you didn't complete the work. It's a perfect catch-22. Religious organisations provide charity, but often with strings attached. Convert to our faith and we'll feed you. Attend our services. Renounce your beliefs. For people on the edge of death, these might seem like easy trades. What's a religious conversion against starvation? But it's still exploiting desperation, still using crisis to force compliance. The amount of aid is calculated based on outdated information and optimistic assumptions. Officials assume the crisis isn't as bad as reported, that people are exaggerating, that some sufferers are frauds trying to take advantage, so they send half of what's needed, then seem surprised when it's inadequate. Requests for more aid are met with skepticism and delay. The fundamental problem is that relief is being administered by people who've never missed a meal, who can't truly grasp the desperation they're trying to address. They design systems that make sense from comfortable offices but fail catastrophically in implementation. The rules and conditions and bureaucracy all seem reasonable until you're the one starving to death while waiting for approval. You realise that the relief system isn't actually designed to save everyone. It's designed to save some people, the most deserving, the most compliant, the ones who can navigate the bureaucracy, while filtering out others. You're supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps are provided while ignoring that comprehensive, immediate, unconditional aid was always possible but never seriously considered. When the workhouses are full, The soup kitchens are dry, and relief has proven to be a cruel joke. You're left with exactly two options: find another way to get food or die. Most people choose the former, which means the line between law-abiding citizen and criminal becomes very blurry very quickly. Turns out morality is surprisingly negotiable when your children are starving. Begging is the first step, the least transgressive survival strategy. You position yourself on a road or outside a church or in a town square and you ask for help. Just ask. Surely someone will have pity. Surely someone will spare a penny or a crust of bread. This seems straightforward until you realize that thousands of other people have had the same idea, and now every available begging spot is occupied by skeletal figures pleading for mercy. You're competing for charity, which is a sentence that shouldn't make sense but absolutely does in this context. The widow with 3 starving children gets more sympathy than you do, so you're earning less. The old man who can recite scripture gets more donations from churchgoers. The young woman, well, she gets attention for different reasons, which we'll get to. You need to market your suffering effectively, which is a horrifying concept, but welcome to famine economics. You develop a pitch. Please, sir, please, mum, anything you can spare, haven't eaten in days, family dying, God bless you. You say it hundreds of times a day until the words lose meaning, until you're just making sounds you hope will trigger generosity. Sometimes it works. Someone hands you a penny or a piece of bread. You're pathetically grateful, more grateful than you've ever been for anything, because that bread might keep your child alive one more day. Most of the time it doesn't work. People walk past without looking at you. They've seen too many beggars, heard too many pleas, become numb to suffering, or they're struggling themselves and genuinely can't help. Or they believe you're lazy, fraudulent, undeserving. They lecture you about finding work, as if work exists and you just haven't bothered looking. You want to scream that you've tried everything, but screaming at potential donors is bad strategy. The better begging spots are controlled. There's a hierarchy among beggars, territorial disputes over prime locations. The corner outside the wealthy church is valuable real estate. Someone's been begging there for months and they're not giving it up. You try to claim it and get chased off by other beggars, so you find a less desirable spot with less foot traffic and lower returns. Even in destitution, there's a pecking order. Children are effective begging tools, which is a terrible thing to say, but it's true. People are more likely to give to a starving child than a starving adult. So you send your children to beg, or you beg with them, positioning them prominently so their obvious suffering might inspire charity. You're using your children's misery as a marketing device. The shame of this sits heavy on you, but not as heavy as their hunger. Some children beg alone, without parents, either orphaned or abandoned or sent out to earn. They form small groups for protection and pool their earnings. Street children become a fixture in towns, clusters of skeletal kids with hollow eyes and outstretched hands. Some adults give to them, others shoo them away like stray dogs. The children develop sophisticated strategies, which adults are marks, which are hostile. What sob stories work best? Begging is technically illegal in many places, or at least regulated. You need licenses or permits that cost money you don't have. Police move you along, tell you to stop bothering decent people. Sometimes they arrest you, which means a night in jail. At least jail includes minimal food, so getting arrested becomes its own survival strategy. Commit a tiny crime, get fed in jail, get released, repeat. It's bleak, but it works. When begging isn't enough, and it's never enough, theft becomes necessary. You start small. An apple from a cart when the merchant isn't looking. A loaf of bread grabbed and run. You're not a criminal by nature. You're a desperate person doing desperate things. The distinction matters to you even if it doesn't matter to the law. The first time you steal something, your hands shake, and your heart pounds and you're certain you'll be caught. You grab the food and walk away quickly, expecting someone to shout, to chase you, to haul you to the magistrate. Nobody notices. You've gotten away with it. The relief is overwhelming, but so is the shame. You were raised to believe stealing is wrong, one of the absolute moral prohibitions. Now you're a thief. The shame fades with repetition. The second theft is easier, the 10th easier still. By the 20th, it's just something you do, a survival skill like foraging or begging. You scout targets, plan approaches, calculate risks. You're becoming competent at crime, which is not how you imagined your life developing, but here we are. Food is the primary target. Bread, vegetables, anything edible. You steal from shops, from carts, from fields. Farmers guarding their crops shoot at thieves, sometimes kill them. You weigh the risk, possible bullet versus certain starvation. Sometimes the starvation seems worse, so you risk the bullet. Sometimes you hear it whistle past in the dark and run like hell and swear you'll never do it again. Then your child cries from hunger, and you do it again. Some people steal non-food items to sell for food money. Tools, cloth, livestock if they can manage it. The risk-reward ratio is different. Livestock theft is a serious crime with serious punishment, but a stolen cow could feed your family for weeks. Some people take that gamble. Some get caught and transported to Australia or hanged. The desperation required to steal a cow while weakened from starvation, knowing the penalty is death, tells you everything about how bad things are. Organised crime increases during famines. Gangs form, sometimes from groups of former labourers who've banded together for survival. They're more efficient than individual thieves. Coordinated raids on grain stores, on aid shipments, on anything valuable. The authorities crack down hard because property must be protected even if people aren't. Extra constables, armed guards, harsh sentences. The message is clear. Let the poor starve, but don't let them steal. Women face a particular calculation about survival that men don't. Prostitution has always existed, but during famines it explodes, as women trade the only asset they have left for food or money. The exchange is stark. Sex for bread, sex for a few coins, sex for survival. It's exploitation wrapped in economic necessity, and everyone involved knows it. Your wife or daughter might disappear for a few hours and return with food. You don't ask where it came from, but discussing it makes it real in a way that's unbearable. So you eat the food and maintain the polite fiction that it was earned some other way. The alternative is starvation, so you make your peace with moral compromises you never thought you'd accept. The men purchasing sex during a famine are a particular kind of predator. They're exploiting desperation, using their resources to extract compliance from women who have no other options. Some of them probably tell themselves it's a fair transaction, mutually beneficial. It's not. It's survival coercion. But the law doesn't see it that way, and the women are the ones who get arrested for prostitution while the men walk free. Disease spreads faster through this population. Women weakened by starvation, engaging in sex work without protection or health care. Transmitting infections back and forth. Syphilis, gonorrhea, other diseases that were always around but now spread unchecked. Women die from these diseases or from complications of pregnancies that result. The babies, if they're born, rarely survive. Some begging becomes aggressive, crosses the line into robbery. You don't just ask for money, you demand it. You're still unarmed, still weak from starvation, but desperation makes you bold. You block someone's path, refuse to move until they give you something. It's intimidation more than violence, but it works sometimes. Other times you get beaten by the target or arrested by police. Actual violent crime increases too, though less than you might expect given the desperation. Murders happen, fights over food that turn fatal, robberies gone wrong, people killing for a loaf of bread. But mostly the starving don't have the energy for violence. You're too weak to effectively attack anyone. The violence that does occur is often shocking in its pettiness. Someone killed over scraps that wouldn't feed a child for a day. The psychological weight of turning to crime is complex. Part of you knows you're doing what's necessary to survive. Part of you feels like you've lost something essential, some core aspect of your identity as a moral person. You were law-abiding, hard-working, decent. Now you're a thief, a beggar, possibly worse. The famine has turned you into someone you don't recognize. Your children watch you steal and beg, and they learn that this is how survival works. They become tiny criminals, expert beggars, morally flexible in ways children shouldn't be. You're passing down lessons in desperation rather than values and skills. What kind of adult will they become, assuming they survive to adulthood? What kind of society is being created when an entire generation learns that law and morality are luxuries for the well-fed? The authorities respond to increased crime with increased punishment, as if severity of consequences matters to people who are dying anyway. Longer prison sentences, more hangings, transportation for lesser crimes. The jails fill up with starving people who stole bread. It's a grotesque parody of justice, punishing survival strategies while doing nothing about the conditions that make those strategies necessary. Some communities organize vigilante justice, taking matters into their own hands. They catch thieves and beat them or kill them outright. Property owners set traps, sharp stakes in fields, poisoned food left as bait, spring guns that shoot anyone who triggers them. You're navigating a landscape that's actively trying to kill you, where both starvation and the prevention of theft are lethal threats. The irony is that most of what you're stealing is trivial. A few potatoes, a loaf of bread, food that wouldn't be missed under normal circumstances, that might have gone to waste. But property is sacred and hunger is not, so you're a criminal for taking what you need to live. The owners who would rather see food rot than feed the starving are just exercising their rights. You start understanding crime not as a moral category, but as a legal one. The landlord who evicts you is committing no crime even though it kills you. You stealing a turnip to live one more day is a crime even though it harms almost no one. The law protects property over people consistently and completely. This realization is radicalizing, though you're too exhausted to do much with that radicalization. By this point you've crossed every line you thought was uncrossable. You've begged, stolen, possibly sold yourself or your family in ways that seemed unthinkable before. You've become what you once would have condemned. And the worst part is that it's not enough. All the begging and stealing and degradation still doesn't add up to enough food. You're still starving. You're just starving as a criminal now instead of an honest person, which somehow makes it worse. When every survival strategy in your immediate area has been exhausted, when there's no more to beg, nothing left to steal, no work within walking distance, no relief available, you come to a simple conclusion. Maybe somewhere else is better. This logic is probably flawed, because everywhere is experiencing the same famine, but logic isn't really driving decisions anymore. Hope is, and hope doesn't require evidence, so you start walking. The roads fill with migrants, streams of skeletal people moving in all directions like the world's most depressing traffic pattern. Some are heading to ports to catch emigration ships. Others are walking towards cities where they've heard there's work or relief. Still others are just walking, moving, because staying still means accepting death and walking at least feels like action. You join this grim procession, carrying whatever you couldn't sell, which is almost nothing, and whatever strength you have left, which is almost none. You're heading toward a town maybe 30 miles away where someone said there's a soup kitchen operating daily. 30 miles. In your former life as a healthy labourer, you could have walked that in a long day. Now, you're looking at 3 or 4 days minimum, probably more. You can walk maybe an hour before needing to rest. Your legs shake with effort. Your vision swims. But you walk because the alternative is staying put and dying. Your family walks with you, those members who are left and able. The smallest child rides on your back for a while, but they're getting heavier, or you're getting weaker, same difference, and eventually you have to put them down. They cry about tired feet. You want to carry them but physically cannot. So they walk, tiny legs working hard to keep pace, and you move as a group at whatever speed the weakest can manage. The roads are lined with other migrants. You pass families like yours, individuals, groups of young men hoping to find work. Everyone looks the same, skeletal, ragged, hollow-eyed. You're all members of the same awful club, united by desperation and hunger. Sometimes you talk, exchange information about where you're headed and what you've heard. Sometimes you just nod in silent acknowledgement of shared suffering. You also pass people who've stopped walking. They're sitting by the roadside, too exhausted to continue. Some are resting temporarily, others permanently. You can tell the difference. The ones who are resting track you with their eyes as you pass. The dead stare at nothing. You try not to look too closely because every corpse could be you in a few hours or days. But you look anyway because you can't help it, and you count them, and the number is horrifying. The bodies line the routes like mile markers. You see them in ditches, under hedgerows, slumped against stone walls. Whole families sometimes, died together. Children curled up like they're sleeping. Old people who made it a few miles from home before their hearts gave out. The authorities can't keep up with burying them, so they just lie there, decomposing, serving as grim warnings that you're probably not going to make it either. No one stops to bury the dead. Everyone's too weak, too focused on their own survival. It feels wrong to just walk past bodies without doing something, without offering some dignity. But what are you going to do? You can barely walk yourself. You can't dig graves. You can't carry bodies. The most you can offer is a prayer muttered while passing, and even that feels inadequate. Some of the dead are clearly victims of violence, robbed and killed for whatever they were carrying. The roads are dangerous even beyond the threat of starvation. Desperate people are unpredictable. Bandits target migrants, knowing they might have a few coins or some food. You're vulnerable, weak, unable to defend yourself. You try to travel during daylight and stay with groups for protection, but groups of starving people aren't much deterrent to determined criminals. Finding food on the road is nearly impossible. You can't beg effectively in rural areas because the people there are as poor as you are. You can't steal from fields because they are either empty or guarded. You packed what food you could before leaving, which was almost nothing, and it's gone by the end of day one. Now you're walking on empty, burning reserves you don't have. You forage as you go. Berries if you can find them, though it's the wrong season. Grass and weeds, same things you were eating back home, but somehow it feels more desperate eating them by the roadside. You drink from streams and puddles, water that might be contaminated, but thirst doesn't give you the luxury of caution. Sometimes you find nothing and just keep walking, stomach cramping, head fuzzing with hunger. Night is particularly miserable. You need to sleep, but there's nowhere to sleep. You huddle in a ditch or under a hedge, the whole family pressed together for warmth. The ground is cold and damp. You have no blankets. You sold them, remember? You lie there shivering, too uncomfortable to really sleep, just drifting in and out of consciousness until dawn, when you can start walking again. The weather doesn't care about your suffering. It rains and you get soaked. Your clothes, those thin rags you're still wearing, provide no protection. You walk in wet clothes, which gives you no chance to dry. Everything chafes. Your feet develop blisters that burst and get infected. You develop a cough from the damp and cold. The cough gets worse. Now you're walking while sick, which accelerates the decline. Other migrants are coughing too. You're spreading diseases among yourselves, sharing typhus and TB and whatever else is circulating through the refugee population. The close quarters at night, everyone huddling together for warmth, ensure that infections spread efficiently. You know this is happening. Know that clustering together is dangerous, but the cold will kill you faster than typhus, so you cluster anyway. You start seeing the same faces on the road, other families moving at similar speeds in the same direction. You develop a kind of companionship with people whose names you don't know. There's the woman with 4 children who's heading to Cork, the old man walking to Dublin where his son supposedly lives, 2 teenage boys trying to reach a port for emigration. You keep encountering each other, leapfrogging as different people rest at different times, and there's comfort in familiar faces even when the faces are gaunt and desperate. Some of those faces disappear. The old man who was walking to Dublin isn't on the road anymore. You passed his body yesterday, recognised him by his coat. One of the woman's 4 children is now 3. You don't ask what happened. The teenager boys are down to 1. The road is winnowing all of you, selecting for some quality that isn't quite luck and isn't quite strength, but determines who keeps walking and who stops forever. Your destination, the town with the soup kitchen, seems to get further away instead of closer. You're moving so slowly that distance becomes almost meaningless. The town that was 30 miles away is still 25 miles away after 2 days of walking. Your progress is measured in hundreds of yards per day. At this rate, you'll arrive in a week, maybe 2. You're not sure you have 2 weeks left in you. You start questioning the decision to leave. At least back home you knew the area, had neighbours, had a ditch you were familiar with. Here you're dying among strangers on a road that looks like every other road, and when you collapse, no one will know who you were. Maybe staying would have been better, but you can't go back now. You've used up your remaining strength getting this far. You can only go forward and hope the rumours about the soup kitchen are true. Sometimes you encounter people going the opposite direction, migrants who've been to your destination and are leaving. This is never a good sign. You ask about the soup kitchen, and they laugh bitterly. Closed last week. Or there's a line of thousands. Or they're only feeding locals. The information is devastating because it suggests you're walking toward nothing. But what choice do you have? You keep walking because stopping means dying right here, and maybe the information is wrong. Maybe you'll be lucky. Other destinations are worse. The ports are nightmares of overcrowding. Thousands of people hoping for ship passage they can't afford. The cities are overwhelmed, their relief systems collapsed under the weight of refugees. The towns are turning away outsiders, sometimes with armed guards who prevent migrants from entering. You're not wanted anywhere. You're a problem to be managed, a burden to be avoided. Some migrants walk in circles following rumours from town to town, always hearing that the next place has food or work or relief. They're chasing mirages, burning through their last energy pursuing hope that doesn't exist. You see the same desperate people again weeks later, thinner and weaker, still chasing the same rumours or new ones. Eventually they stop appearing on the roads, the walking dead becoming the actual dead. Children struggle most with the journey. Their smaller bodies have less endurance. They complain more, which is understandable but makes everything harder. You have to carry them sometimes, which exhausts you faster. You have to move at their pace, which is slower than you could go alone. But you can't leave them behind. The road is littered with abandoned children, and you're not ready to join the parents who made that choice. Some children get separated from their families in the chaos. You see lone kids wandering, looking for parents who've died or disappeared or deliberately left them. These orphaned road children are in special danger, too young to fend for themselves, too vulnerable to predators. Some adults take them in, others step over them. You'd help if you could, but you can barely help your own children. Your body continues deteriorating as you walk. The exertion burns calories you don't have. Your muscles cannibalize themselves for fuel. You're getting weaker daily, visibly wasting. Your clothes hang off your skeletal frame. Your face becomes a skull with skin stretched over it. Mirrors don't exist on the road, but you see yourself reflected in your family's faces, in other migrants' appearances. You're all becoming corpses while still technically alive. The psychological toll of the endless walking is its own torture. Every step is agony. Every mile is a victory that doesn't feel like victory because there are so many more miles ahead. You exist in a state of constant motion without progress, like a nightmare where you run but never arrive. The monotony of suffering, the sameness of each horrible day starts breaking your mind. Some people on the road have clearly lost their sanity. They talk to people who aren't there. They laugh at nothing. They walk in the wrong direction or in circles. Starvation and despair have broken their minds, and now they're just bodies going through motions without coherent thought. You're afraid you're headed there too. Your thoughts are getting fuzzy, your memory unreliable. Sometimes you can't remember why you're walking, where you're going. Then clarity returns and you remember, and you're not sure which is worse, but you keep walking. Because humans are stubborn creatures who cling to life long past the point of reason. Because giving up means lying down in the ditch and you're not quite ready for that. Because maybe, possibly, the next town will be different. Because your children are still moving and you won't quit while they're trying, so you walk. One foot in front of the other, slow and painful and probably futile. Walking toward hope or death. And honestly, at this point, they might be the same thing. So let's talk about what happens when you finally stop walking. When your body gives up, when the long slide into death reaches its inevitable conclusion. You might hope for some dignity in death, some recognition that you were a person who mattered, some proper farewell. That would be nice. That's not what you get. Death during a famine doesn't look like death in normal times. There's no deathbed scene with family gathered round. No priest administering last rites while you make peace with your maker. No time to say goodbye or pass on final words of wisdom. You just stop. Maybe you're walking and you collapse and don't get up. Maybe you're lying in a workhouse dormitory and you slip away during the night. Maybe you're in your ditch home and you go to sleep and don't wake up. It's typically quiet, unremarkable. Just a transition from breathing to not breathing. Your body doesn't even look dramatically dead at first because you've looked half dead for weeks. The other starving people around you might not notice immediately. Are you sleeping or deceased? Hard to tell when everyone looks corpse-like. Someone eventually checks, finds no pulse, confirms the obvious, you're gone. Now you're a logistics problem, a body that needs disposing of before it becomes a health hazard. In normal times, your death would trigger rituals refined over centuries. Your body would be washed and dressed in clean clothes. You'd be laid out in your home for a wake where neighbours would visit, offer condolences, say prayers. There'd be a funeral service, a procession to the graveyard, burial in a proper grave with your name marked. Your family would mourn, the community would remember, you'd become an ancestor, a name on a family tree, a story told to grandchildren. None of that happens now. Your body is already filthy and there's no clean water or clothes for washing and dressing. There's no wake because there's no home. You died on the road or in a workhouse or in a demolished cottage. Your family, if they're still alive, is too weak and scattered to organise a funeral. The neighbours are dying themselves or have fled. The priest is overwhelmed with dozens of deaths daily. The whole social machinery that creates a good death has completely broken down. Instead, your body gets hauled to a mass grave. These pits are being dug on the outskirts of towns and villages, large holes in the ground designed to accommodate dozens or hundreds of bodies. Sometimes they're actual graves dug for the purpose. Sometimes they're just ditches or abandoned quarries or any convenient hole. The men doing the digging are either paid workers, usually the least starving of the poor, or prisoners assigned to burial duty. They dig until the hole is big enough, then start filling it with corpses. Your body arrives at the pit in whatever conveyance was available, maybe a cart. Thrown in with 5 or 6 other bodies, maybe carried by 2 exhausted men who drag you by the arms and legs, maybe just dragged along the ground because no one has the strength to lift you. You're deposited at the edge of the pit, and then you're rolled or tossed in. No ceremony, no prayers, just efficient disposal. The pit fills up quickly because people are dying faster than they can be buried. Bodies are stacked in layers, sometimes separated by thin layers of dirt, sometimes just piled on top of each other. You're in there with people from all over, different villages, different families, strangers in life, and now roommates in death. The pit is just a jumble of bodies in various states of decomposition, all the individual identities merged into anonymous mass death. Sometimes there's a priest or minister who says a collective prayer over the pit before it's filled, a single blessing for dozens of souls, an efficient bulk processing of the dead. May these souls rest in peace. Amen. Next pit. It's better than nothing, but not by much. More often there's no religious service at all. The burial crew just finishes filling the hole, packs down the dirt and moves on to digging the next one. No one records your name. There's no grave marker, no headstone, no wooden cross with your name carved in. There might be a general marker indicating burial site or the year, but nothing identifying individuals. Your descendants, if you have any, will never know where you're buried. They won't be able to visit your grave, won't know which piece of ground to stand on when remembering you. You've simply vanished into the earth with no trace. The record-keeping that does exist is perfunctory at best. Maybe a workhouse registers that inmate number 47 died on such and such date. Maybe a parish priest notes in a ledger that approximately 30 persons were buried this week. The numbers are often estimates because the dead are arriving too fast for careful counting. You become a tick mark in someone's approximation, a unit in mortality statistics, not a person with a name and a history. Many bodies never make it to even these mass graves. You die on the road. Remember all those corpses you passed while walking? Those bodies often just lie there for days or weeks. The locals in the area might eventually drag them away and bury them somewhere, or they might not bother. You decompose by the roadside, slowly returning to nature in the least dignified way possible. Animals scatter your remains. Weather breaks you down. Eventually you're just bones in a ditch that someone will find decades later and wonder about briefly before moving on. Dying in a field or under a hedgerow means you might get shallow burial right there, someone scraping dirt over you just enough to reduce the smell and keep animals away. Or you might get no burial at all. Your skeleton becomes part of the landscape, a grim archaeological feature that marks this period of horror. Future farmers will plough up your bones, future builders will excavate you. You'll be a curiosity, a historical footnote, a set of remains that get briefly examined before being reburied in some municipal ossuary. The sheer number of dead overwhelms every system designed to handle mortality. In normal years, a village might have 10-15 deaths annually, manageable numbers that allow for individual attention to each death. During the famine, that same village might have 10 deaths in a week, hundreds over a few months. The graveyards fill up immediately. There's no space for individual graves, even if there were resources for individual funerals. Churches run out of burial space and have to petition for emergency graveyards, for permission to use unconsecrated ground, for any space that can accommodate bodies. The new graveyards are just open fields where pits are dug and filled continuously. They look more like construction sites than sacred ground. Disturbed earth everywhere, piles of dirt, crude excavations. Nothing peaceful or pastoral about them. The smell around burial sites is overwhelming. Bodies decomposing in mass graves, especially when they're not buried deeply, or the graves are reopened to add more bodies, produce an unforgettable stench. Sweet and rotten and wrong, it carries for considerable distance. People living near the burial grounds are constantly breathing in the smell of death. There's no escape from the sensory reminder of mortality. Children's deaths are particularly heartbreaking in their anonymity. Tiny bodies thrown into pits, infants who lived days or weeks and then disappeared into mass graves without ever being truly seen as individuals. Parents who can't afford to bury their children, who have to let them be taken away by burial crews who don't even know where their child ended up. Mothers asking years later where their baby is buried and receiving blank stares because no one knows, no one recorded it, the child was just one of thousands. The wealthy, meanwhile, still get proper burials. They die in comfortable beds, get washed and dressed, have funerals with services and mourners, get individual graves with nice headstones. Death has always been unequal, but the famine makes it obscenely visible. 2 tiers of mortality, dignified death for those who can afford it, anonymous disposal for those who can't. You can tell someone's social class by how they're buried, which honestly seems like inequality should stop mattering once you're dead, but apparently it doesn't. Some families try desperately to give their dead members proper burial. They save precious resources to buy a coffin, or they build one from scavenged wood. They carry the body to a graveyard and try to negotiate for individual burial. Sometimes this works. Sometimes a sympathetic priest finds space. Sometimes families manage to scrape together enough money for a plot. These are the lucky ones, relatively speaking. They get to know where their loved one rests. Most families don't manage this. You want to give your child a proper burial, but you can't afford it. You want to honour your spouse with a marked grave, but there's no money and no space. You want your parent to have a funeral, but you're too weak to organise one. So you let them be taken to the pits, and you feel guilty about it for the rest of your life, and you try to remember that you did the best you could under impossible circumstances. The guilt of surviving to bury your family is its own special trauma. You live, they died, and you are helpless to prevent it. You make decisions about their bodies, sending them to mass graves, leaving them where they fell, that feel like betrayals. You couldn't save them in life and you can't honour them properly in death. The failure compounds itself, layers of powerlessness and guilt that you'll carry forever. The community memory of the dead is also fractured. In normal times, people would be remembered. Stories told, anniversaries marked, names spoken. During the famine, there are too many dead to remember individually. The mourning is collective and diffuse. We lost so many replaces we lost Uncle Michael. The individual tragedies blur into one enormous tragedy, and specific people get lost in the mass of suffering. Future generations will try to count the dead, to create statistics and mortality estimates. They'll debate numbers. Was it 1 million dead or 2 million? Was the mortality rate 20% or 30%? These academic discussions will treat your death as a data point, a number in a demographic calculation. Your actual life, your personality, your dreams and fears and loves, none of that makes it into the historical record. You're just a statistic in someone's famine study. There's something profoundly dehumanizing about dying uncounted and unmourned, about becoming one of the anonymous masses rather than a specific person whose absence creates a specific hole in the world. You lived a whole life, loved people, laughed at things, had hopes, experienced joys and sorrows. All of that, all the complexity of being human, gets reduced to another famine victim. Your death is noted only as contribution to the overall toll, never as its own tragedy. The mass graves will eventually be forgotten too. The locations get lost as people die or move away. The unmarked pits become fields or roads or building sites. Construction crews will occasionally unearth them. Hundreds of skeletons in a jumble, clear evidence of mass burial. And there will be brief local interest, maybe some historical investigation. Then the bones get reburied somewhere and life goes on. Your remains become an archaeological curiosity, briefly notable, then returned to anonymity. This is how you die during a famine when you're poor. Not gloriously or meaningfully or surrounded by love. Quietly, anonymously, disposed of efficiently, forgotten quickly. Your death is neither marked nor mourned. You simply stop existing and the world continues without noting your absence. It's the final indignity in a long series of indignities, the last humiliation of poverty. Even your death doesn't matter. So let's talk about what happens when you finally stop walking, when your body gives up, when the long slide into death reaches its inevitable conclusion. You might hope for some dignity in death, some recognition that you were a person who mattered, some proper farewell. That would be nice. That's not what you get. Death during a famine doesn't look like death in normal times. There's no deathbed scene with family gathered round, no priest administering last rites while you make peace with your maker, no time to say goodbye or pass on final words of wisdom. You just stop. Maybe you're walking and you collapse and don't get up. Maybe you're lying in a workhouse dormitory and you slip away during the night. Maybe you're in your ditch home and you go to sleep and don't wake up. It's typically quiet, unremarkable, just a transition from breathing to not breathing. Your body doesn't even look dramatically dead at first because you've looked half dead for weeks. The other starving people around you might not notice immediately. Are you sleeping or deceased? Hard to tell when everyone looks corpse-like. Someone eventually checks, finds no pulse, confirms the obvious. You're gone. Now you're a logistics problem, a body that needs disposing of before it becomes a health hazard. In normal times, your death would trigger rituals refined over centuries. Your body would be washed and dressed in clean clothes. You'd be laid out in your home for a wake where neighbours would visit, offer condolences, say prayers. There'd be a funeral service, a procession to the graveyard, burial in a proper grave with your name marked. Your family would mourn. The community would remember. You'd become an ancestor, a name on a family tree, a story told to grandchildren. None of that happens now. Your body's already filthy and there's no clean water or clothes for washing and dressing. There's no wake because there's no home. You died on the road or in a workhouse or in a demolished cottage. Your family, if they're still alive, is too weak and scattered to organise a funeral. The neighbours are dying themselves or have fled. The priest is overwhelmed with dozens of deaths daily. The whole social machinery that creates a good death has completely broken down. Instead, your body gets hauled to a mass grave. These pits are being dug on the outskirts of towns and villages, large holes in the ground designed to accommodate dozens or hundreds of bodies. Sometimes they're actual graves dug for the purpose. Sometimes they're just ditches or abandoned quarries or any convenient hole. The men doing the digging are either paid workers, usually the least starving of the poor, or prisoners assigned to burial duty. They dig until the hole is big enough, then start filling it with corpses. Your body arrives at the pit in whatever conveyance was available. Maybe a cart thrown in with 5 or 6 other bodies. Maybe carried by 2 exhausted men who drag you by the arms and legs. Maybe just dragged along the ground because no one has the strength to lift you. You're deposited at the edge of the pit. and then you're rolled or tossed in. No ceremony, no prayers, just efficient disposal. The pit fills up quickly because people are dying faster than they can be buried. Bodies are stacked in layers, sometimes separated by thin layers of dirt, sometimes just piled on top of each other. You're in there with people from all over, different villages, different families, strangers in life and now roommates in death. The pit is just a jumble of bodies in various states of decomposition, all the individual identities merged into anonymous mass death. Sometimes there's a priest or minister who says a collective prayer over the pit before it's filled. A single blessing for dozens of souls, an efficient bulk processing of the dead. May these souls rest in peace. Amen. Next pit. It's better than nothing, but not by much. More often there's no religious service at all. The burial crew just finishes filling the hole, packs down the dirt and moves on to digging the next one. No one records your name. There's no grave marker, no headstone, no wooden cross with your name carved in. There might be a general marker indicating burial site or the year, but nothing identifying individuals. Your descendants, if you have any, will never know where you're buried. They won't be able to visit your grave, won't know which piece of ground to stand on when remembering you. You've simply vanished into the earth with no trace. The record-keeping that does exist is perfunctory at best. Maybe a workhouse registers that inmate number 47 died on such and such date. Maybe a parish priest notes in a ledger that approximately 30 persons were buried this week. The numbers are often estimates because the dead are arriving too fast for careful counting. You become a tick mark in someone's approximation, a unit in mortality statistics, not a person with a name and a history. Many bodies never make it to even these mass graves. You die on the road, remember all those corpses you passed while walking? Those bodies often just lie there for days or weeks. The locals in the area might eventually drag them away and bury them somewhere, or they might not bother. You decompose by the roadside, slowly returning to nature in the least dignified way possible. Animals scatter your remains, weather breaks you down. Eventually you're just bones in a ditch that someone will find decades later and wonder about briefly before moving on. Dying in a field or under a hedgerow means you might get shallow burial right there. Someone scraping dirt over you just enough to reduce the smell and keep animals away. Or you might get no burial at all. Your skeleton becomes part of the landscape, a grim archaeological feature that marks this period of horror. Future farmers will plough up your bones, future builders will excavate you. You'll be a curiosity, a historical footnote, a set of remains that get briefly examined before being reburied in some municipal ossuary. The sheer number of dead overwhelms every system designed to handle mortality. In normal years, a village might have 10, 15 deaths annually, manageable numbers that allow for individual attention to each death. During the famine, that same village might have 10 deaths in a week, hundreds over a few months. The graveyards fill up immediately. There's no space for individual graves, even if there were resources for individual funerals. Churches run out of burial space and have to petition for emergency graveyards, for permission to use unconsecrated ground for any space that can accommodate bodies. The new graveyards are just open fields where pits are dug and filled continuously. They look more like construction sites than sacred ground. Disturbed earth everywhere, piles of dirt, crude excavations. Nothing peaceful or pastoral about them. The smell around burial sites is overwhelming. Bodies decomposing in mass graves, especially when they're not buried deeply, or the graves are reopened to add more bodies, produce an unforgettable stench. Sweet and rotten and wrong, it carries for considerable distance. People living near the burial grounds are constantly breathing in the smell of death. There's no escape from the sensory reminder of mortality. Children's deaths are particularly heartbreaking in their anonymity. Tiny bodies thrown into pits, infants who lived days or weeks, and then disappeared into mass graves without ever being truly seen as individuals. Parents who can't afford to bury their children, who have to let them be taken away by burial crews who don't even know where their child ended up. Mothers asking years later where their baby is buried, and receiving blank stares because no one knows, no one recorded it. The child was just one of thousands. The wealthy, meanwhile, still get proper burials. They die in comfortable beds, get washed and dressed, have funerals with services and mourners, get individual graves with nice headstones. Death has always been unequal, but the famine makes it obscenely visible. 2 tiers of mortality: dignified death for those who can afford it, anonymous disposal for those who can't. You can tell someone's social class by how they're buried, which honestly seems like inequality should stop mattering once you're dead, but apparently it doesn't. Some families try desperately to give their dead members proper burial. They save precious resources to buy a coffin, or they build one from scavenged wood. They carry the body to a graveyard and try to negotiate for individual burial. Sometimes this works. Sometimes a sympathetic priest finds space. Sometimes families manage to scrape together enough money for a plot. These are the lucky ones, relatively speaking. They get to know where their loved one rests. Most families don't manage this. You want to give your child a proper burial, but you can't afford it. You want to honour your spouse with a marked grave, but there's no money and no space. You want your parent to have a funeral, but you're too weak to organise one. So you let them be taken to the pits, and you feel guilty about it for the rest of your life, and you try to remember that you did the best you could under impossible circumstances. The guilt of surviving to bury your family is its own special trauma. You live, they died, and you were helpless to prevent it. You make decisions about their bodies, sending them to mass graves, leaving them where they fell, that feel like betrayals. You couldn't save them in life, and you can't honour them properly in death. The failure compounds itself, layers of powerlessness and guilt that you'll carry forever. The community memory of the dead is also fractured. In normal times, people would be remembered, stories told, anniversaries marked, names spoken. During the famine, there are too many dead to remember individually. The mourning is collective and diffuse. We lost so many replaces, we lost Uncle Michael. The individual tragedies blur into one enormous tragedy, and specific people get lost in the mass of suffering. Future generations will try to count the dead, to create statistics and mortality estimates. They'll debate numbers. Was it 1 million dead or 2 million? Was the mortality rate 20% or 30%? These academic discussions will treat your death as a data point, a number in a demographic calculation. Your actual life, your personality, your dreams and fears and loves, none of that makes it into the historical record. You're just a statistic in someone's famine study. There's something profoundly dehumanizing about dying uncounted and unmourned, about becoming one of the anonymous masses rather than a specific person whose absence creates a specific hole in the world. You lived a whole life, loved people, laughed at things, had hopes, experienced joys and sorrows. All of that, all the complexity of being human, gets reduced to another famine victim. Your death is noted only as contribution to the overall toll, never as its own tragedy. The mass graves will eventually be forgotten too. The locations get lost as people die or move away. The unmarked pits become fields or roads or building sites. Construction crews will occasionally unearth them. Hundreds of skeletons in a jumble, clear evidence of mass burial. And there will be brief local interest, maybe some historical investigation. Then the bones get reburied somewhere and life goes on. Your remains become an archaeological curiosity, briefly notable, then return to anonymity. This is how you die during a famine when you're poor. Not gloriously or meaningfully or surrounded by love. Quietly, anonymously, disposed of efficiently, forgotten quickly. Your death is neither marked nor mourned. You simply stop existing, and the world continues without noting your absence. It's the final indignity in a long series of indignities, the last humiliation of poverty. Even your death doesn't matter.